to get surveyed because we knew that there were a lot of wonderful things there. And we have worked with the county government in the past and with the municipality of Roxborough and have made efforts to get a survey underway. We thought we might have one right before COVID, and that sort of derailed some conversations with the county. So we were very, very pleased to pick this up as part of the Florence and Michael relief. And we were very pleased that Sherry and Heather were interested in conducting the survey. Those of you who've been on the committee for any length of time know their names through the many National Register nominations that they prepare each year and other survey projects that they've done. So we could not be more pleased to have had Heather and Sherry on this project. And I think as they give their presentation, it will be abundantly clear just the amount of effort and professionalism and just true engagement that they have put into this survey. So I know they're going to cover everything really thoroughly, so I won't belabor it anymore. Heather, I assume you're probably going to start the presentation.
I do, and I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint. So
Okay.
let's see if this works. And... all right, are y'all getting it?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Then we're going to go, I'm going to start and Sherry and I are going to sort of take turns because we have a lot of properties and we don't want to lose anyone's voice. So before we really dive in, we want to start by thanking the staff of the Survey and Planning Branch for all they've done throughout this project. As Beth mentioned, this was one of the county surveys funded with the Supplemental Historic Preservation Fund. And we started work in Person County in 2021. So we have been in that county for a long time. It's been a much bigger project than I think any of us anticipated, and we could not have gotten through it without the help of Beth King, Sarah Woodard, and Rebecca Spanbauer, who guided us and reviewed files and even hopped in the car to go out and survey with us. And Andy Edmonds and Chandria Birch for all their mapping, the maps and apps that Andy made, and the file support. And a special thanks for Kelly Malloy, who served as part mentor and part cheerleader and was overall our biggest support in this project. And one more, a quick thank you to Carrie Curry with the Person County Museum of History, who gave us a home base in the office and more research materials than we could ever get through. We're still going through them. So we couldn't have done it without that local help as well. So a quick overview of the project. It was completed in 3 phases. So phase 1 took place in the fall of 2021 and included the survey of 263 resources that the state already had files and documentation on prior to this project. And during that time, we also completed a windshield survey of the county to identify additional properties to survey. Phase 2 took place throughout 2022 and included a survey of approximately 350 properties in the rural part of the county. Those were mostly houses and farmsteads, schools and churches, stores and community buildings, and resources associated with industry and infrastructure. And then phase 3 took place largely from September of 2022 through the spring of 23 and included survey within the Roxborough municipal limits and included mostly houses, churches, community buildings, schools, mills, and neighborhoods. So in total, the survey increased the number of documented resources in the county from 263 to roughly 750. So you can see how much it is increasing our knowledge of the historic resources in the county. The study list recommendations that we have here represent the most intact resources, but are not by no means an exhaustive list. And exclusion from this list should not be interpreted as a determination of ineligibility. There are certainly more properties in the county that would be eligible. In some cases, interiors were just not accessible. And in many cases, properties were not selected only because they were not the very, very best examples of a particular style or theme. But utilizing the survey report, other properties may well be added to the study list in the future. So Person County encompasses approximately 400 square miles in north central North Carolina and is bordered by Orange and Durham counties to the south, Granville County to the east, and Caswell to the west. And to the north, Person County is bordered by Halifax, Virginia, Halifax County. The county is in the North Carolina Piedmont region, which is of a relatively flat or gentle rolling topography. And the county was originally inhabited by people of the Saponi and Occaneechi tribes. And while members and descendants of the Saponi tribe remain in the High Plains area of Northeast Person County today, no indigenous sites were identified during the survey. And I'm going to pass it to Sherry, who's going to talk about our 2 archaeological sites.
Okay, well, first I just want to echo what Heather said. We're so very grateful to staff. Sometimes it's a challenge for me to come down from Michigan, and Kelly in particular really stepped in a lot and helped us and supported us, and we really appreciate all of that assistance. We're going to go through these as sort of categorically, and like Heather said, just sort of take turns so you don't get too tired of either of our voices, hopefully. So we're going to start with archaeological sites. The county's rolling hills have been carved by a number of waterways, including the Hyco and Mayo rivers, and several smaller creeks, including Stories and Marlowe's creeks. The headwaters of the Neuse and Tar rivers are also located in the county, and these resources facilitated European settlement of the region in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. As newcomers from Virginia and Pennsylvania moved southward, they constructed dams and ponds for grist and sawmills on the small creeks and waterways throughout the county. And mills operating in Hurdle Mills, Cunningham, Woodsdale, Mount Tirzah, and other crossroads communities remained central to the county's economy and to community life throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. Of these, Hurdle Mill is the only extant mill structure that remains in its original location. So we'll start with the Barnett's Mill site. We have 2 mill sites for you. This is located within a bend of Stories Creek on the north side of McGee's Mill Road, approximately 4.5 miles northwest of downtown Roxborough. And these are the remnants of a 19th century grist mill operation that includes the foundations of 2 mill structures that date from the early to mid 19th century, both located north of a stone dam and northeast of the mill race. Mill number 1 retains several dry stacked stone walls as well as a stone pier at the interior of the structure. This mill appears to predate the second mill, which is built of cut stones and features portions of all 4 walls, as well as clear evidence of the mill race and location of a water wheel. The dam is of cut stone construction, dry stacked without mortar, and rises at least 6 feet above the water line. A bridge was constructed over the dam in the 1920s. The early history of the site is somewhat convoluted. However, according to a 1981 newspaper article, the property, which then totaled 450 acres, already contained a lake and mill site when it was purchased in 1818. And the article reports that an earlier earthen and wood dam was replaced at that time, noting that in 1830, the owners purchased a 94-acre portion of the larger tract, including the lake, and erected a 4-story mill with an 18-foot overshot wheel. So this was operated by the Barnetts until 1881, when the property was sold. It is not at all clear when the mill ceased operation, but it was certainly defunct by 1986. And the Moores Mill site, located in southeast Person County, just north of the Durham County line. This site is located on the north side of the Flat River and accessed by a gravel drive that extends west from Moores Mill Road. While modern construction is located on the main part of the tax parcel, remnants of the stone dam, stone mill race and gate, and the stone foundation of the mill remain along the south part of the parcel by the river. The dam, which crosses the Flat River west of the mill, featured a mortared stone wall at the south end, which remains intact today. On the north end, it was constructed of wood boards that could be removed if it was necessary to lower the water level west of the dam, but the wooden structure is no longer extant. A mill race extended from the north end of the dam and features a stone wall along the south side that is interrupted by a gate able to be raised or lowered to control the flow of water. The mill race extends roughly 500 feet in total from the dam to an intersection just northwest of the mill, where the stone walls turn and force the water south into the mill. While the upper part of the 2.5-story frame mill building was destroyed between 1968 and 1975, 3 of the 4 stone foundation walls, as well as a steel water wall on the south wall, remain in place. East of the mill is a stone-lined spring. Its relationship to the operation of the mill is not clear. The early history of Moore's Mill is not known, but the construction of the dam and mill foundations are similar to those of Barnett's Mill. The first printed reference to the mill that was found was an 1885 newspaper article indicating it was extant by that time. An article published in 1940 notes that the mill was 90 years old at that time and had just been overhauled to include electric lights, phone service, picnic grounds, and spring water. The documentation of both mill sites was reviewed by the Office of State Archaeology, and that office had already evaluated Moore's Mill in 1981, noting that it, quote, appears to be the most significant and of the historic resources located within the Flat River Reservoir Project area. And they recommended additional study for the site. No archaeological documentation has been conducted for Barnett's Mill site, but OSA indicated that it would be a good candidate for the study list, noting that both sites can contribute to our understanding of technological advancements in 19th and 20th century Piedmont mills.
So we have these divided up into sort of themes, and I wonder if it makes sense to vote by theme, so, or ask questions at least so that we don't get too far in the weeds and forget what we've seen.
Heather, that's a great point. I'm glad you raised that. I was planning to raise that myself, but in talking with Sarah earlier, that does seem to be the best way, at least to have the discussion for each theme, and then we can hold the vote for the end. That way we don't get lost. So if we'll go ahead and start now with discussion on the 2 archaeological sites. Are there any comments or questions from any of the members?
I have just a question. As you were describing just the overall properties, and I was thinking about how some of our indigenous folks have identified trading paths, and I was just curious, did that come up? Because there's work with with primarily Occaneechi-Saponi folk to document where their trading paths are, and I know they go into Virginia, and there is a person who has been documenting her family. So I was just, that might be a tangent, but something to think about as you cover this archaeological component.
Sure. Sherry, you want to take that one?
Yeah, it hasn't come up, but I'll qualify that with a yet, because like Heather said, they have sent me more information than any project, and maybe every project combined. It's so much material, and I just haven't gotten through it all. So it may yet be discovered, but it wasn't something that people told us about as we did the survey work. So we'll keep that in mind, and I'll make a special note to look out for that as I go through all this material.
And I can give you the name of the person who's documented that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we spoke with one member of the Saponi tribe, a descendant who was great. We spent the better part of a day with him. And I know that I think in Virginia, there's a community center, a resource, a museum, something to do with the Saponi. And I know we've tried to get in touch with them once, but we're not done. We're still working on the report. So some of that will still come out in the report.
Thank you.
I'll add one comment as an archaeologist that both of those sites have excellent preservation of intact features. So it's great to see that.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot more mills, or were a lot more mills, and there may be other ruins back in the woods. But if somebody didn't walk us back there to show us, we don't necessarily know that it's there.
Were they both grist mills, or do you know what kind of
Yes.
mills they were?
They were
Okay.
grist mills. All right, we ready? This next one only has 2 properties as well. While the irrigation, drinking, and power-producing uses of the numerous creeks and streams were attractive to early settlers, these waterways were not generally navigable, and as a result, Person County remained, quote, backcountry into the 19th century. With limited access to markets, the establishment of small subsistence farms was far more common than that of larger plantations, though a number of the latter did exist in the county. The current survey identified very few resources predating 1880 that had not already been documented by the 1975 Tar Noose survey. Additionally, it appears that few, if any, agricultural buildings remain extant from the 19th century. Additional 19th century houses beyond the 2 presented here appear eligible for this study list. However, interior access could not be obtained to verify the material integrity of the interiors. So those were just noted in the files as potentially eligible, but needing more information. The Greek Revival style was employed in Person County beginning in the 1830s. Approximately 40 houses were identified, mostly during the 1975 Tar Noose survey, as having been constructed in the style or updated with Greek Revival style details between 1835 and 1880. However, half of those had been demolished or were recorded as in deteriorated or ruinous condition by 2022. The Bowes Street House is an L-shaped cross-hipped example that retains high material integrity, including plain weatherboards, flush sheathing under the pedimented porch roof, a double leaf door, and 6/6 wood windows. The interior was not accessible. However, photos were available online from a 2020 sale of the house. It was constructed as a center hall plan with 2 rooms each at the 1st and 2nd floors. Carpeting has been installed in some areas, but original wood flooring remains in many rooms, and original woodwork, including post and lintel mantels, are present throughout. The dining room in the original rear wing includes a corner stair to the upper level of the rear L. 2-panel Greek Revival style doors also remain at the 2nd floor. The early history of the house is not known, though the 1975 Tar Noose survey dated the house to 1850 and gave it the name the Bowes House. Deeds from the 1950s refer to it as the Thomas H. Street Estate, and Street appears to have been living in the area by 1880. While the interior materials and condition would need to be verified and more work should be done to confirm the date of construction, the house appears eligible under criterion C for architecture. According to Betsy Slaughter, a neighbor, the well-preserved vernacular Italianate style house was erected in 1896 for John D. and Cornelia M. Winstead. Winstead was a tobacco farmer, and the Winstead family farmed at least 600 acres in this area. The 2-story L-shaped house has a cross-hip roof, brick and stone foundation, plain weatherboards, and 1/1 wood windows. Sawn brackets at the roof line and decorative sawn trim on the eaves are all elements of the Italianate style. The 2-story hip roof porch wraps around the right elevation, supported by Tuscan columns. Parallel 1- and 2-story wings extend from the rear of the building. The interior retains a center hall with stair, wood floors, original mantels, and built-in cabinets. Most of the tobacco-related outbuildings have been torn down in recent years, but a frame pack house remains. And this house also appears eligible under criterion C for architecture. Do y'all have any questions about these?
Yeah, on the Bow Street House, is there any other archaeology on site, like an outdoor kitchen or ice house or anything like that?
No, it was part of a larger farmstead. There are 1 or 2 log tobacco barns on a separate parcel, but there were not enough farm buildings for us to record it as a farm. The only other thing on this parcel is a 1960s garage.
Okay.
I would expect this is one, though, that there might be a statement of archaeological potential. I'm imagining that that'll come out during the review.
Yeah, I would imagine that with any of these and all of the farms that we're going to present, that OSA would add that statement to any nomination that comes out of them. Anything else? All right, I'm going to let Sherry start this one out. This is our biggest group, I think.
And it could have been a lot bigger. So we'll do the agricultural resources next. The soils of Person County consist of a variety of well-drained sandy loam and silt loam types that support the cultivation of tobacco and grains, as well as livestock pasture. While there are few extant farmhouses and agricultural outbuildings from the 19th century, the agricultural economy grew by the end of the 19th century with the production of brightleaf tobacco, which dominated Person County for the next century. A substantial number of log tobacco curing barns and pack houses related to brightleaf tobacco cultivation constructed during this period remain extant throughout the county. Rural Person County is rich with intact farmsteads, and while the survey prioritized farmsteads with large collections of outbuildings or farmhouses with distinctive architectural detailing, many more farms could and should be documented in the county, and many more additional farms beyond what we will present here are likely eligible for the study list. All of the properties in this section are significant for agriculture, though additional research is necessary to determine the evolution of field patterns and to solidify a period of significance. Additional areas of significance, when applicable, will be noted in the narrative. And we'll start with the Robert L. Hester Farm. Located on the west side of Robert Hester Road, this sprawling 155-acre farm complex includes a 2-story house, detached kitchen, and myriad of farm buildings related to both livestock and tobacco cultivation. The centerpiece of the complex is a 2-story L-shaped farmhouse. While it has been covered with vinyl siding and has vinyl windows, it retains its most distinctive exterior feature, a 2-story hip roof porch with tapered square posts and decorative sawn brackets. Outbuildings include a gabled frame kitchen with reconstructed stone chimneys, a wash house, equipment barn, carriage house, and livestock barn immediately southwest of the house, the latter 3 likely dating to the turn of the 20th century. South of the house, the tobacco-related buildings line a gravel drive with a frame pack house standing adjacent to Robert Hester Road. These log and frame tobacco barns appear to largely date to the late 19th century, though sheds and other features date to the mid to late 20th century. This map gives a sense of the distribution of outbuildings across 3 tax parcels. And this is the James and Ora Whitfield Farm. This land, like much of the area surrounding Hurdle Mills, has been in the Whitfield family for generations, and deeds indicate the 17-acre tract is part of the James Elijah Whitfield estate. You'll see we have lots of Hesters and Whitfields in the agriculture section. While the 1-story farmhouse dates to the early 20th century, several buildings and site features on the property predate the house and may have been constructed by Whitfield's parents, John and Elizabeth, who relocated to the Bushy Fork area between 1850 and 1860. Domestic outbuildings adjacent to the house include chicken houses, a smokehouse, woodshed, garage, workshop, and a well house adjacent to a small creek. West of the house are animal-related buildings, including a corn crib and granary, 2 log livestock barns that likely predate the house, and a feed mill for grinding feed on site. Extending south from the animal-related buildings are 4 log curing barns, a frame pack house, a mid-20th century workshop, and an animal barn that likely housed hogs. The Whitfield Farm is a highly intact tobacco farm complex with early 20th century log curing barns and livestock barns.
This is the Julius Monroe and Elizabeth Wright Jones Farm. This farm encompasses an early 20th century farmhouse, family cemetery, and a significant farm building complex with elements dating from both the 19th and 20th centuries. The unusually large and complete complex spans both sides of Jones Road, southwest of Hurdle Mills, and just inside Person County's border with Orange County. A number of outbuildings appear to predate the house, which was likely constructed in the 19 teens and has been updated with modern materials. Among the many outbuildings and features on the farm are domestic outbuildings located immediately west of the house and including a combined wash house smokehouse, a flower house, and a well house. Further to the west are a pack house, garage with an integrated corn crib, and a well house and dairy, livestock barn, and log tobacco barns. At the far west end of the complex is a tenant house and farm pond. The oldest and most impressive of the tobacco barns on the property stand on the east side of Jones Road, northeast of the house. The half dovetail notched log barns are constructed of very large hand-hewn logs and rest on stone foundations. And these appear to predate the 19-teens house and were likely associated with an earlier structure to the north, though only the chimney of that house remains. A small cemetery is also in the area, though is very overgrown. The Jones Farm is a highly intact tobacco farm complex with 19th century log carrying barns and 20th century pack houses and livestock barns. And the complex includes a total of 4 pack houses and 9 carrying barns. This is the George W. and Nancy Oakley Farm. This small farmstead may have been established by George Washington and Nancy Oakley around the time of their marriage in 1882. Though given the log construction, the house may be even earlier, constructed by a member of the Hobgood family. The one-story with loft gabled log house has a stone foundation and board and batten sheathing applied with square-cut nails. A batten door and 4/4 wood window on the north elevation are sheltered by a hip-roofed porch. A one-story frame wing at the rear has plain weatherboards, 4/4 windows, and a stone chimney in the gable. The interior visible through the front window includes a single room with a fireplace featuring a plain mantel with a simple band of molding just below the shelf. A batten door leads from the main part of the house to the rear wing, which has a beadboard interior. The small collection of domestic outbuildings includes a log smokehouse, machine shed, pack house, chicken house, animal barn, and family cemetery containing 28 members of the Hobgood, Oakley, and Peed families, with the oldest graves dating to 1848. At the west end of the property, adjacent to Allen Creek Road, is a second house and a frame store. The history of these buildings is not clear, though they appear to have been constructed in the late 19th century and may have been occupied by members or tenants of the Oakleys. The one-story front gabled frame building that appears as a store has batten doors on the west end facing the road. The main side gabled part of the house is log construction, and a gabled hyphen at the rear connects to 2 gabled frame wings arranged end to end and separated by an interior brick chimney. Both of the wings are single rooms with exterior entrances on both side elevations, plain weatherboards, and beadboard interiors. In addition to agricultural significance, the Oakley House and the secondary house on the site appear eligible under criterion C for architecture as 19th century log houses with frame additions. Log housing was constructed throughout the 19th century and into the 1930s in Person County, and the 2 houses on this farm are rare unaltered examples of that trend.
This is the George Preston and Virginia Jones Allen Farm. This large complex associated with the Allen family consists of the main farmhouse, domestic outbuildings, and buildings associated with raising tobacco, livestock, and poultry. According to June Allen Rogers, the current owner and occupant, the house was constructed by her grandparents, George Preston and Virginia Jones Allen, likely after their 1891 marriage. The main farmhouse is a AAA house, a form typical throughout Person County. While vinyl windows have been installed at the first floor and the original porch posts have been replaced, the house retains its original double leaf front door, 2/2 wood windows at the second floor, and brick chimneys. The couple's oldest son, Ira Green Allen, constructed a house to the north facing his parents' house. The property has a particularly full complement of domestic outbuildings to the west of the house, including a mid-20th century concrete block well house, 2 frame garages, and a smokehouse. North and west of the house are 2 small collections of animal-related buildings. These include a corn crib, chicken house, and animal pen. The two-story frame animal barn, also built around 1900, is particularly notable. The 1950 frame egg house is a rare survivor of the type. And June Rogers Allen remembers as a child washing the eggs, grading them, and packing them to be sold in Danville, Virginia. Across Snipes Road to the east are the tobacco-related resources. These include a pack house, 4 log curing barns, 2 stick sheds, and an undetermined frame structure that may have been an additional pack house. Roughly 1/2 mile northwest of the house, at the far west of the property and accessed from Robert Hester Road, is a single tenant house that appears to have been constructed in the 1950s. The families farmed tobacco until about 1981 and now lease the farmland. In addition to tobacco, the family had goats, sheep, turkeys, and layer chickens, all of those uses evident in the extant farm buildings. And I'll just take a moment here to note that the people in Person County were really lovely, and we were able to get information like this because without hesitation, they would invite us in and tell us all their stories. And so we're really grateful to people for both being home and being friendly. So this is the James Arthur Whitfield Farm. This large and particularly complete farm complex was the property of James Arthur Whitfield, a farmer and local businessman. Whitfield married his first wife, Viola Lee O'Brien, in 1898, and this farm was likely established about that time. The centerpiece of the farm is the 2-story Queen Anne style dwelling featuring 2-story front gabled canted bays projecting from the facade. Although the house has been covered with vinyl siding and displays some replacement porch materials, it retains many original features, including 2/2 wood windows, an exterior stone chimney with a brick stack, and sawn trim in the gables. Immediately south and west of the house are a series of domestic outbuildings that appear to have been constructed concurrent with the house. These include a board and batten wash house, flower house, smokehouse, chicken house, machine shed, and grape arbor. South of the house stand 5 tobacco curing barns and 2 pack houses, one a unique form that seems to combine the curing and storage processes in a single 2-part building. At the far south end of the property, separated from the main house by the tobacco barns, is a mid-20th century tenant house. In addition to tobacco, the family grew corn and meat. They also had chickens, cows, and other animals for family subsistence and the general operation of the farm. West of the house are livestock barns, corn crib, granary, well house, and a concrete trough. On the north side of Union Grove Church Road, opposite the house, are a barn, machine shed, and log corn crib. Whitfield reportedly also had a sawmill and store on the property, though neither remain extant. The Whitfield farm contains a large number of domestic outbuildings, as well as examples of both log and frame tobacco and livestock-related buildings.
I couldn't unmute myself. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm back. According to a neighbor, the 200-acre farm was the Ernest Moore home place and is currently farmed by Moore's grandson, Ted Moore. The complex includes a farmhouse and a mix of historic and modern farm buildings associated with tobacco cultivation, dairy production, and modern chicken and grain production and storage. It is the only dairy still in operation in the county. At the center of the farmstead is a traditional house that retains its original form but has been updated with modern exterior materials over time. The decorative front gable is embellished with boards cut in a sawtooth pattern and a turned and sawn barge board. A front gabled garage stands to the rear of the house, and a tenant house stands to the northwest. The farm is one of the only in the county to retain a full complement of dairy-related resources. While many farms took on beef herds in the mid-20th century, dairy was far less common in Person County. 2 frame dairy barns, a milking parlor, and numerous grain bins and silos are located east of the house, most dating to the 1940s and 50s. A large gabled chicken house stands directly south of the dairy buildings. You can see that in the bottom left. Tobacco-related resources remain at the northwest corner of the property near the tenant house, though log curing barns are now used for storage. The Moore Farm is a highly intact dairy farm complex, a rare example of the type in the county and the only one still in operation. This is the Bose Hester Farm. This farmstead includes a substantially intact farmhouse, tobacco-related outbuildings, a blacksmith shop, tenant house, and tenant house. The farm was associated with the Bose family beginning about 1905 and has been owned by members of the Hester family since the 1950s. With the exception of replacement window sashes, the house at the center of the farmstead retains much of its original materials inside and out, including a stone foundation, plain weatherboards, standing seam roof, and a front gable featuring scalloped sawn boards and sawn barge boards. The interior of the center hall plan house retains wood floors, horizontal beadboard walls and ceilings, and 5-panel doors. A breezeway connecting the rear L to the house was enclosed to provide a bathroom. Original mantels with mirrored overmantels remain on the first floor fireplaces, and the rear wing has a kitchen and dining room separated by a fireplace. South of the house, across Tom Bowes Road, are 3 log tobacco barns and a log pack house. Its low-slung shed roof form an unusual one for the county. In addition to farming, Bowes operated a small blacksmith shop on the property, and that building still stands just south of the house. Bowes also owned a sawmill, though it's not clear where that was. Hester raised tobacco until 1980 when he quit smoking and decided to raise beef cattle, a practice that continues on the property today. Perhaps the most significant part of the farm complex is the circa 1925 tenant house. Historically associated with the Bowes farm, it is significant in its own right as a dwelling that was used to house farm tenants for much of its history, and that has been developed by its owner into a local museum dedicated to the Lawson family, a Black tenant family who lived in it throughout much of the 20th century. The house was occupied by Shorty Cornell Lawson from the 1950s through 1974 and by his descendants until 2017, despite the fact that the house has never had interior plumbing. With research and oral histories compiled by Randy Hester, the building and the museum he developed within it tell the story of the Lawson family, a personal narrative of Black tenant farming during the Civil Rights era. The displays in the museum include photographs, text, and history of the Lawson family, household items, farming implements, and art. In addition to agriculture, the Bowes Hester Farm appears eligible under criterion A for social history for its unaltered circa 1925 tenant house and the thorough interpretation of tenant farming that can be obtained from the house and property.
All right, next we have the Charlie and Artelia Norris Farm. Charlie and Artelia Norris encompasses a large and well-preserved collection of domestic, tobacco-related, and general farm buildings, as well as a family cemetery. A frame house, which has been demolished, originally stood at the center of the 138-acre complex built by Charlie and Artelia Norris about 1910. However, some outbuildings appear to predate this time and may have been constructed by Charlie's parents, William and Harriet Norris. By the mid-20th century, the farm was largely a tobacco-producing enterprise, but the family also grew soybeans and wheat and had livestock, including milk cows. Domestic outbuildings and those related to livestock are largely located on to the northwest of the ranch house, and include a garage, chicken house, smokehouse, livestock barns, corn crib, tack room, machine shed, and fertilizer storage. The tobacco was flue cured in log tobacco barns on the east side of Walnut Grove Church Road, 4 of which remain. The family also utilized bulk barns in later years, filling those before they would fill the stick barns. The family stopped growing tobacco in 1985, by which time they had established a herd of beef cattle, though they sold that several years later. Early 20th century livestock barns and corn cribs remain extant along a dirt road south of the tobacco barns. The Norris Farm is a highly intact tobacco farm complex with early 20th century log curing barns and livestock barns. And this is the Bernia and Lily Huff Farm, located on Bunny Huff Road and bordering the Granville County line to the east. This approximately 120-acre farm extends across 2 parcels, each of which spans both sides of the road. The property includes a farmhouse, domestic outbuildings, a large collection of tobacco-related buildings, and a family cemetery. The farm was likely established by the Huffs shortly after their 1914 marriage. The AAA I House features aluminum siding, though retains a 5V metal roof and 6/6 wood windows throughout. A wide 1.5-story rear L may predate the front part of the house. Domestic outbuildings are located behind the house and include a partially collapsed frame building that may have been constructed as a wash house or early exterior kitchen. Most tobacco-related outbuildings are found east of the farmhouse and include 2 frame pack houses, 6 log tobacco barns, and a tenant house amidst the barns. A cemetery stands adjacent to the driveway near the road. The Huff Farm is an intact tobacco farm complex with a large collection of log curing barns.
This is the Claude T. and Addie Jones Hall House. The 1,100-acre tract of land in the Bethel Hill community in northeast Person County is one of several owned and operated by the descendants of Claude T. and Addie J. Hall. Addie was the only daughter of Moses Street Jones, who, quote, owned many hundreds of acres of land in the Bethel Hill community, plus 2 blocks of town property. The 2-story brick farmhouse at the center of the complex was built by Claude and Addie Hall about 1930, constructed around the original Moses Jones house on the property. The hip-roofed house is one of a small number of brick farmhouses built in the county. The material was much more common in urban areas. Craftsman-style details include 6/6 wood sash windows, a wide cornice with paired brackets at the roof line, and a full-width hip-roof porch supported by craftsman-style columns on brick piers. The front yard is landscaped with mature trees and shrubs. Among the accessible outbuildings associated with the property are a brick garage, frame building that may have been a workshop, and a brick well house near the house. A gambrel roofed frame barn, another frame building, and the frame of a windmill are located to the east. A log pack house and a group of log tobacco barns are found down a farm road to the west. Dairy cattle were grazing on this property with a fence extending along the west side of the row of barns, making the west end of the property inaccessible, though additional tobacco barns could be seen northwest of the fence and gated drive. In addition to agriculture, the Hall Farm appears eligible under criterion C for architecture. The brick craftsman style house is rare within the rural part of the county. The property may also be eligible under criterion B for its association with Claude T. Hall, who served on multiple agricultural boards locally, as well as 6 terms on the North Carolina Board of Agriculture, totaling 33 years. He was inaugurated into the North Carolina Agricultural Hall of Fame in 1977. Do y'all have any questions about the individual farmsteads? No?
I do, if that's okay.
Okay.
I didn't want to jump in case others wanted to go first, but I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. First, in terms of comments, the condition integrity of those properties as farmsteads is really impressive, and I say that really coming from an archaeological perspective, which is my next comment is that I understand that most of these are late 19th, early 20th century farmsteads, but seeing those as intact farmsteads is incredibly helpful as an archaeologist to look at what earlier farmsteads or farm landscapes might have looked like in terms of the interpretive value, the use of space on those properties, what kinds of archaeological signatures those might have. And a lot of those outbuildings are often gone, so it's great to see those later resources that still have those. And then my question is really on the cemeteries. You noted, if I correctly hear, 4 properties have associated cemeteries. My question is, did you or are you planning to record those to give those archaeological site or cemetery site numbers so that they would show up in different inventories besides the HPO number?
So we've talked with OSA about completing the cemetery forms that they have for the family cemeteries that we found. Most of what we found is recorded on Find a Grave and things like that, but we are planning to give the information to OSA as well.
If I could just add from the architectural survey program's perspective, I think we were truly stunned at the number of agricultural outbuildings that came out of the Person County survey. Just for comparison, we've been working most recently in 10 other extremely rural counties in North Carolina, counties that are not dominated by one city or that have any kind of urban context to them. And Person County is absolutely in a class of its own among the survey that we've done, even in just the 21st century, in the last almost 25 years. We have not seen the retention of agricultural outbuildings to the extent that Heather and Jerry uncovered in Person County, and especially the tobacco related outbuilding. The retention of that is really remarkable when so many rural counties that had tobacco as their economic mainstay don't retain those outbuildings to the extent that you see in this survey. So, and I invite you to have some sympathy for Heather and Sherry when they arrive on a property, and sometimes you're out doing rural survey and you stop and you record a house, but in so many cases Heather and Sherry were stopping to record a house plus 20 to 30 additional buildings on the same site. So truly the number, saying that we have 750 survey files in Person County now, it really belies the fact that so many of those numbers are assigned to 25 buildings on an agricultural site. So again, just to emphasize the amount of work that went into this project.
We definitely were getting our steps in.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Sean said about just the amazing value of all that work for, just additional understanding the landscape and how it was used. And that actually leads to my question, which is, given the intact nature of a lot of these farms, do you see a potential for potentially a landscape nomination, something that kind of goes beyond just these individual farms and recognizes that this is a region, something that might link them together and really show, that this really is a unique area, as you just described.
Yeah, I think you're getting ahead of us a little bit. Maybe we have 3 farms that we're going to present in this next section that were so big and so complex that we had to use multiple numbers to record them. So we've created 3 potential rural historic districts for these generational farms. But Sherry and I have talked, not with Jeff yet, but about the potential for some sort of a rural MPDF or something that can sort of capture, a lot of it will be in our survey report, but something that can tee up additional, perhaps smaller farmsteads for listing.
I do have a question. First, a comment. I too was very impressed with the large number of outbuildings, and that's quite surprising to me, and delighted to see such a large number. A question is, any evidence of ice houses?
We didn't see any or hear of any.
You know, that and outhouses seem to be two of the first of building types to disappear, and for good reasons, I guess. But awfully nice work. It really impressive group. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, y'all ready? You want to start this one, Sherry?
I'm sorry to interject. There's a question in the chat from Ramona regarding MPDF. Is someone willing to explain that for those of us who are maybe new to the committee, please?
I can attempt to do that, and Jeff Smith, our National Register Coordinator, can jump in if I do too bad of a job. The multiple property documentation form is a method of establishing context for a particular, it could be a particular architectural style, it's more often a theme in local history. And it is a document that you prepare for the National Park Service. In and of itself, it does not list any properties in the National Register, but it's a way to amass the historic context that would be found in your average National Register nomination in such a way that that future nominations almost operate under a shorthand. They refer back to that larger document and they say, this house or this farm meets the guidelines that are outlined in this longer document. And so it's a way of, if you have multiple properties that could be nominated along the same lines or for the same areas of significance, having the same basic historic criteria, it's a way to shorthand future nominations that all build off that common theme and that common context that's been developed. So to Heather and Sherry's point, because there appear to be so many potentially eligible intact farmsteads in Person County, it could be a time saver, a money saver, to have an MPDF that lists the criteria that make for a significant and intact farmstead in Person County. And then future nominations could reference that longer document without having to develop from scratch the full historic and material context over and over and over again in individual nominations.
Okay, so on to rural historic districts. Agriculture went through a period of transition in the mid to late 20th century. As tobacco went into decline, many family farms stopped growing tobacco or leased their acreage and allotments to commercial farming firms. Tenant farming also declined significantly during this period as laborers sought the stability and regular paychecks of employment with industries in Roxborough. Active farms illustrate the decline of small and mid-sized family tobacco farms and the resulting consolidation into larger commercial operations, as well as modern trends in agriculture. Extant outbuildings illustrate the evolution of tobacco drying processes in the county from log and frame barns with flues to modern bulk barns with forced air heating systems. The 3 generational farms highlighted here appear eligible under Criterion A for agriculture. And we'll start with the Hester Wagstaff Farm Rural Historic District. The Hester Wagstaff Farm encompasses several farm complexes associated with the interrelated Hester and Wagstaff families. The farm was established about 1870 by John Holman Hester on the fertile land around Concord Church that proved beneficial for the cultivation of tobacco. Hester's father, Alexander Jackson Hester, constructed the earliest house in the area, shown here at the bottom right. This map shows the 9 interrelated houses and tenant houses associated with the family. 2 of the named houses were constructed by the daughters of John and Josephine Hester, who themselves lived in the Andrew Jackson Hester house at the south end of the complex. Betty Lou Hester married Kenneth Clyde Wagstaff in 1912, and the couple constructed a small house nearby. That house was enlarged to its current form in the mid-1920s. Surrounding this house are outbuildings related to the management of beef cattle, the farm's current industry. Among these outbuildings are machine sheds and an early 20th century livestock barn. Huldah Hester married Charles Emery Winstead in 1923, and they constructed their house at what is the north end of the district. This house has been heavily renovated and contains outbuildings only across a cultivated field. Betty Lou and Kenneth had 5 children, and their son Lindsay Thompson Wagstaff and his wife constructed this ranch house in 1953 across the road from his parents' house. The Hester and Wagstaff families always employed both sharecroppers and tenant farmers, utilizing those systems of labor into the 1970s. At one point, the home farm, which is the current 1,100-acre tract, contained about 26 houses, 50 tobacco curing barns, and 10 pack houses. This tenant house and associated buildings stand southeast of Betty Lou Hester's house. Many of the tobacco-related farm buildings associated with the large operation were located in complexes near the tenant dwellings. The log curing barns were still being used in the early 1970s, but were ultimately replaced with bulk barns about 1975, though the family continued to hand-pick the tobacco. In addition to growing tobacco, Lindsay Wagstaff co-owned the Farmer's Warehouse in Roxborough. Among the sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and other workers on the Wagstaff farm were Betty Lou Wagstaff's cook, Hattie Cobb. Jane Wagstaff also remembers another tenant, Scott Barnett, who was working on the property in the early 1980s when she and John Wagstaff obtained the Charles and Huldah Hester Winstead house. In addition to tobacco, the Wagstaffs farmed corn and grain. They also had hogs and chickens for subsistence. The family started a herd of beef cattle in the 1950s that currently includes about 200 brood cows and 60 heifers. The Wagstaff stopped farming tobacco in 1998 when the government stopped the cost control programs. They currently lease their sandy tobacco soil to Cal Berryhill, who does grow tobacco. Many of the curing barns have deteriorated with lack of use. According to Lindsay Wagstaff, the warmth from the furnaces would ensure that the logs stayed dry, but without the operating furnaces, the logs begin to rot. Groundhogs have also led to the instability of many of these log barns. Ultimately, the farm was passed to Lindsay's sons, Lindsay Jr. and John Wagstaff, who have gradually acquired more property and currently control more than 1,100 acres along Samora Road today, as well as additional land to the north and west. The Hester Wagstaff Farm Rural Historic District appears eligible under Criterion A for agriculture and Criterion C for architecture as a large and intact complex of family residences, tenant houses, and early 20th century tobacco curing barns and pack houses. The cumulative effect of the buildings is a rural landscape virtually unaltered from the mid-20th century. And to Beth's previous point about the number of buildings we documented at some of these places, Lindsay Wagstaff was so kind to drive us around this particular property. The Huff Farm Rural Historic District is next. There are 2 adjacent farms related to the Huff family in northeastern Person County near the Granville County line. The approximately 125-acre tract on the north side of Polk Huff Road, along with a 75-acre tract on the south side, was originally owned by Nathaniel T. Huff, though the land was largely farmed by his sons, George and Alfred. On the north side of the road stands a 1.5-story side-gabled house. A seam in the weatherboards on the facade suggests that the house may have started as a 1-room dwelling that was enlarged to its current form by Polk Huff about 1920. A 1-story gabled L at the southwest may predate at least part of the front part of the house. Among the outbuildings associated with this part of the farm are a smokehouse, pack house, chicken house, and livestock barns. 4 log and bulk curing barns extend east of the house along Polk Huff Road, where a second dwelling may have been constructed as a tenant house. 3 late 20th century houses located on parcels cut out of the original tract are interspersed with the historic farm buildings on this side of the road. On the south side of the road, facing J.D. Denny Road, is a 2-story frame house, likely constructed about 1882, the year Nathaniel Huff married Harriet Sherman. The I-house features late 19th century detailing, including paneled corner boards, boxed eaves, gable returns, and a double-leaf 2-panel door flanked with a 4-light transom. In addition to the house, this tract includes late 19th century and early 20th century log and bulk curing barns along Polk Huff Road, a frame pack house and garage northeast of the house, and a machine shed and farm pond southeast of the house, the latter straddling the Granville County line. In addition to agriculture, the historic district may also be eligible under criterion C for architecture for the Italianate style I-house and vernacular log and frame dwellings, though the interiors were not accessible for evaluation.
This is the Pierce Fouché Farm Rural Historic District. This farm includes several houses related to the extended Pierce and Fouché families, as well as 20th century outbuildings related to the curing of tobacco. The centerpiece of the complex is the Thomas Anderson and Emma Moore Pierce House, and a large collection of farm buildings, many of them dating from the second half of the 20th century. The couple had 7 children in total, and their daughters Helen and Eloise constructed houses adjacent to their parents. This is the Thomas and Emma Pierce house at the center. The family raised tobacco, corn, wheat, and soybeans. The farm's many outbuildings are scattered around the circa 1901 farmhouse on the south side of Satterfield Road. Buildings related to the storage of livestock, grain, and hay are located near the center of the property. The surviving traditional tobacco curing barns are found both west and east of the old farmhouse, while the more recent bulk curing barns are clustered near the northwest side of the property, adjacent to a circa 1980 warehouse. The brick minimal traditional house was constructed about 1940 by Cavaness Banks and Helen Pierce Fouché. To the west, this brick ranch house was constructed in 1953 by Eloise Pierce. This brick ranch on the north side of the road was constructed in 1971 for George and Susan Fouché. And George's brother Ronald and his wife Deborah constructed this brick ranch house next door in 1973. Ronald and George Fouché, who are grandsons of Thomas and Emma Pierce, together own the larger farm complex where they continue to grow tobacco, handpicking the leaves using migrant labor, and curing the tobacco in bulk barns, which stand northwest of the house on the south side of Satterfield Road. The Pierce Fouché Farm Rural Historic District is a large and intact complex of family residences, illustrating a generational farm that extended more than 100 years. The complex illustrates the conversion from log curing barns to bulk curing barns and the associated changes in the farm landscape. And we spent so many hours watching those migrant workers. They thought we were crazy. This is the Hurdle Mills Historic District. The community of Hurdle Mills is located at the intersection of Hurdle Mills, Union Grove Church, and Guess Roads in southwest Person County. It was established in the mid-1800s adjacent to the Daniels Mill, although that mill was conveyed to the Hurdle family and the small town was renamed for their ownership of the mill. The mill itself stands about 1/2 mile northeast of the commercial core. Roughly halfway between the mill and the commercial buildings is the Brooks and White Funeral Home, which is the original funeral home. The current building, this company is still in operation in downtown Roxborough. Commercial buildings near the intersection of Hurdle Mills and Union Grove Church Roads include the 1923 Fouché's Garage, the 1964 D.L. Whitfield and Company store, a 1943 post office, and a late 20th century fire department. Residential resources extend east and south of the commercial area along Hurdle Mills Road and include residences largely dating from the 1860s, through the 1940s. Agricultural resources are intermixed with the residential resources, most associated with the Wilburn Whitfield farm that stood immediately south of the commercial area. Hurdle Mills represents the second largest rural community in the county, behind Timberlake in southeast Person County. While Timberlake has more dense residential construction, it no longer retains a commercial core. The Hurdle Mills Historic District is an intact example of a rural community that formed in the mid-19th century and grew throughout the early 20th century. Y'all have any questions on that group? Nothing? Okay. Sherry, you're up.
So we'll do the rural, commercial, and industrial properties now. Country stores began to open throughout the county's rural areas in the first half of the 19th century. Due to the scarcity of large markets and the prevalence of poor roads during this time, these small local stores provided immediate neighbors with grocery staples and dry goods, and in some cases also sold agricultural goods produced in the surrounding community. It was common for a store to form the center of a crossroads community, which in turn was named after the store. The stores presented here are significant for commerce unless otherwise noted. And we'll start with the Baines store. Memorialized in a 1939 photo by the Farm Services Administration photographer Dorothea Lang, this frame store is located just southeast of the intersection of Wheeler's Church and Burlington Roads. Lang, who spent only a week or so in North Carolina working alongside social scientists from UNC, took photos of tenant farm families and rural buildings associated with them throughout this part of the county. The two-story front gabled frame store appears much as it did in 1939, though without the liveliness provided by the signage and occupants shown in the photo there on the top left. It has a pierced stone foundation, plain weatherboards, and a 5V metal roof. A one-story shed-roofed wing spans the right elevation. A matching wing on the left elevation, visible in the 1939 photo, is no longer extant. A covered area at the rear appears to have been for loading, and a small shed-roofed wing at the southeast is a privy. The interior, now used for storage, retains flushwood sheathing on some walls, wood floors, and exposed ceiling beams. Lang's original caption for images of the store submitted with her photos to the FSA describes it as a meeting place down the road from a tenant farmer's house. She notes that, quote, "That store is where all business is done, where everything is transacted, where all loans are given, where they're kept in hock forever. That store is everything." The store appears eligible for the National Register under Criterion A for social history as the social center of the Gordonton community. It may also be eligible for commerce, though more information is needed. Next is the DM Cash store. Located on Berea Road, just east of the intersection of Bethany Church Road and Mount Harmony Church Road, this one-story front gabled store building retains the name DM Cash painted on a stuccoed panel in the front gable. While brick commercial buildings were constructed in Roxborough and Timberlake, this building is the only early 20th century rural store building identified in the county constructed of brick. It retains a double leaf 6-light over one panel door sheltered by a craftsman style porch. The side elevations feature high 6-light windows, and a shed-roofed carport extends from the east elevation. The interior of the building retains wood floors and beaded board sheathing on the walls and ceiling. The 1920 federal census lists DM Cash as a farmer, though by 1930, he is listed as a merchant, suggesting that he constructed the store between 1920 and 1930. The building is currently used by the adjacent Bethany Methodist Church as a youth meeting space. In addition to commerce, the building appears eligible under criterion C for architecture.
This is the J.B. Holoman store, located at the northwest corner of Hurdle Mills and Payne's Tavern Roads. The front gabled frame store is a good example of early 20th century rural commercial architecture. 1.5 stories tall, the building retains weatherboards, a metal roof with exposed rafter tails, and 12 light wood sash windows flanking the centered entrance. The front gabled canopy is supported by 2-part brick columns and has a pressed tin ceiling. A sign in the front gable of the canopy reads J.B. Holoman. The building appears to have been constructed by Charles Holoman in the late 1930s, but was conveyed to his son, James Brown Holoman, who's listed as store manager in the 1950 census. The interior was not accessible, but the building has never changed use, instead used only for storage since the store closed, and it's still in the Holoman family. So the interior is very likely unchanged. Verification of interior integrity is necessary for significance under criterion C for architecture, but the building appears eligible also under criterion A for commerce. This is the Central Carolina Farmers Exchange. This building was constructed as a 1-story multi-bay commercial building in 1956. The company, headquartered in Durham, served as an agricultural distribution and informational center to support the thriving agricultural economy of the county. The building stored and distributed agricultural supplies to the farmers in the region. The 2-story wing at the left, as seen in the top left photo, was completed about 1960 and currently bears the name Southern States. The rear elevation faces the railroad with several loading docks and an elevated wood and concrete dock. The front elevation features vehicular loading docks and the main pedestrian entrance. The interior of the building was documented as part of a 2020 environmental review project, and these photos show that interior divided into retail space, office and storage areas, and distribution receiving areas. The interior has a combination of wood and concrete floors, a drop ceiling, and paneled wood doors. The Central Carolina Farmers Exchange was determined eligible for the National Register in 2020 through that environmental review process, and we agree that with that assessment, that the complex appears eligible under criterion A for agriculture.
And this is the Bushy Fork Milling Company, prominently located at the crossroads of Frank Whitfield and Burlington Roads in the Bushy Fork community. The mill complex includes the mill, a seed cleaner, and a large livestock barn. And this is the seed cleaner building right here. The mill was constructed by John Elmer Whitfield, who had previously operated a seed cleaner on his family farm to the south. The mill ground wheat and barley, but closed in the early 1990s and is now used for storage. The 2-story front gabled mill has wide weatherboards, corrugated metal panels at the upper level, and 2/2 horizontal pane wood windows, indicative of its mid-20th century construction. North of the mill is a gambrel roof barn with a wide center aisle flanked by stalls. Grain bins are west of the barn. The seed cleaner features a gabled pop-up on the east end of the gabled roof. South of the seed cleaner and west of the mill is a small frame scale house with adjacent in-ground scale. Modern garages and sheds are located south of the mill. The Bushy Fork Milling Company appears eligible under criterion A for industry as a rural mill established for the county's farming community. And that's the end of our commercial industrial. So if there are any questions or comments.
I have one comment, which is it's the DM Cash Store. I was really impressive with that building. Just the fact that it's brick, and I believe you said it's the only brick building like it in the county. But its condition and the fact that the original sign is still there, just really impressive building.
Yeah, there are lots and lots of frame stores, but we did not see brick stores outside of the Roxborough and Timberlake.
I had a question on some of the Crossroads stores. Are any of those evidence it used to sell gasoline or anything like that, underground tanks?
Yeah, a lot of them used to have pumps, it looks like.
Okay, we'll go on to religious properties, which, as you can imagine, there was no shortage of in this county. Churches stand both as locational landmarks and as centers for community gathering, especially those in the rural parts of the county. In many instances, roads are named for the churches that front them, reinforcing their prominence as physical landmarks. Only 5 19th century churches are known to be extant in the county. Many early congregations erected new buildings in the early and mid 20th century, and among these, most of the frame churches were covered with brick veneer by the mid or late 20th century. As a result, brick and frame churches with colonial revival style detailing are very common throughout the county, making it difficult to assign significance of one over another. Therefore, the churches considered here are the exceptions to that trend. Unless otherwise noted, all of the churches being considered appear eligible under criterion C for architecture. And we'll start with Shiloh Primitive Baptist. While a church history was not available, the plaque in front of the church, installed by the Person County Museum of History, indicates it was established in 1875 by Elder Andrew N. Hall, making it the oldest of the 6 extant primitive Baptist churches in the county that we surveyed. The land for the church was given in 1879, with the deed noting that the church was already extant. The one-story front gabled frame church stands on a stone foundation covered with stucco and features hand-hewn sills and sawn beams supporting the floor. Louvered shutters cover the 9/9 wood windows. Within a projecting gabled entrance bay constructed in 1974 are the original paired 2-panel doors with segmental arch transoms. The interior of the sanctuary retains wood wainscot, wood floors under thin carpeting, and a raised dais at the rear wall. Extending north of the church and largely encircled by a decorative metal fence is the Associated Cemetery, with approximately 90 marked graves dating from 1880 to 2019. Northwest of the church is a 2-room gabled frame bathroom building that replaced an earlier privy, also still extant on the site. Despite the application of vinyl siding in the front entrance bay, the church appears eligible as one of the earliest and most intact church buildings in the county.
This is Hester's Grove Baptist Church. This was the first building associated with the African American congregation of Hester's Grove Baptist. The front gabled frame building has plain weatherboards and 6/6 wood windows. A gabled cross wing at the rear results in a slight T-shaped footprint. The interior retains wood floors and flush wood sheathing on the walls and ceilings. A dais at the east end of the interior retains a turned rail. And it's now used only for storage, including of tobacco, apparently. The congregation was established in 1912, and the early church was likely constructed at that time. The building appears to have been in use until the 1950s, when a new building was constructed nearby. In addition to architecture, the church may be eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage as the earliest extant African American church in the county. The African American congregation of Obie's Grove was established in 1921 and likely constructed this building at the north end of Raintree Road about that time. The front gabled frame building has a stone pier foundation, plain weatherboards, 9/9 windows, and a 5V roof. A side gabled crosswing spans the rear of the building, resulting in a T-shaped footprint. A projecting gabled apse on the rear elevation was removed, and the rear wall of the apse was moved in to fill the opening. So you can see where they just shoved the rear wall back in. The name of the church is scratched into Parging on one of the piers. In 1963, the congregation completed a new building, and this church appears to have been vacant since that time. While the interior was not accessible, the fact that the building was never converted for another use indicates its interior is likely intact. In addition to architecture, the church appears eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage as an early extant African American church in the county.
Next, we have St. Mark's Episcopal Church. This is one of only 2 stone churches in the county, which is surprising given the sheer amount of fieldstone everywhere used for chimneys and foundations well into the 20th century. Beginning in 1920, a group of Episcopalian congregants began meeting in Roxborough, and in 1923, ground was broken and the cornerstone laid for this building, designed by congregant Edwin Eberman. The city of Roxborough gave the stone, having excavated it as part of the construction of the Roxborough Waterworks. The building is constructed of load-bearing stone and contains pointed arch windows with diamond-paned stained glass. A projecting front gabled vestibule is centered on the facade. Flanking gabled wings at the rear result in a T-shaped plan. The interior retains exposed stone walls, wood floors, and arched ceiling trusses. Also located on the site are a circa 1971 columbarium, a 1952 blonde brick parish house, and a circa 1925 parsonage with a shed-roofed frame garage to the rear. St. Mark's Episcopal Church is the only example of a stone church in Roxborough and utilizing local stone in its construction. And then last for this group is the Allensville United Methodist Church. The origins of this church date to 1834 when it began as the Bethlehem Church. By the early 1930s, the church building had fallen into disrepair and a new building was needed. According to local lore, architect Howard Haynes was standing in the churchyard when he recognized flint stones in the area. When he asked if there was much of the stone around, he was told that, quote, farmers had been picking flint rock out of their fields for years. There were piles of it all over the countryside. Stonemason Jim Painter led a crew of workers to erect the building, which was completed in 1933. The front gabled Gothic Revival style stone sanctuary is marked by stone buttresses along the side elevations and a bell tower at the front of the gabled roof. The entrance is sheltered by a later porch constructed in 1992. The side elevations feature windows set in pointed arch surrounds, glazed with small diamond-shaped panes. The interior of the sanctuary is finished with plaster and retains wood floors, beaded board wainscot, and exposed wood trusses at the ceiling. The educational building at the rear of the sanctuary was also designed by Howard Haynes and contracted in 1966, then dedicated in 1975. A 1956 ranch house northwest of the church was built as a parsonage. A cemetery with graves dating to 1880 extends east of the church. Allensville United Methodist is the only example of a stone church in rural Person County and utilizing local stone in its construction. And that's it for the churches, if there are questions or comments.
Okay, we will move on. Schools form the social center of rural Person County communities, providing education for the youth of the county, but also space for community meetings and recreation. Excuse me. Schools for white children began to be consolidated in the 1920s, with a number of two-story brick schools built in the county during that era. The 1950s saw the consolidation of African American schools in the county, and the school system was fully. I'm going to ask Sherry to talk while I get this off my throat.
It was bound to happen to one of us. The 1950s saw the consolidation of African American schools in the county, and the school system was fully integrated in 1969, at which time the rural high schools closed or were converted to elementary schools. Rural frame schools were converted for residential use or abandoned and left to deteriorate, and as a result, few early 20th century school buildings remain extant in the county. Unless noted, all of the buildings in this section appear eligible under criterion A for education. We'll start with Union Grove Baptist Church and School. The front gabled frame building was erected about 1903 as the first sanctuary for the Union Grove Baptist Church, established in the late 1880s. That church constructed a new sanctuary in 1920, and about that time, or slightly before, this building was used as a school for African American students in the western part of the county. According to an exhibit in the Person County Museum of History, the building was used as a school beginning about 1919 and remained in operation until 1956, when consolidated schools were built throughout the county. The front gabled frame building has plain weatherboards, 6/6 wood sash windows, a 5V metal roof, and paired 5-panel wood doors sheltered by a hip-roofed porch supported by timbers. While the interior retains plaster walls and wood floors, a full-height wall separates the front and rear of the building, and partial height partitions further divide the space. The 1920 church to the west was brick veneered in the mid-20th century and enlarged in 1968 and again in 1997. In addition to the church buildings, the site encompasses several important features in other buildings, including a cemetery, baptismal pool, spring, store building, bell tower, privy, and stone walls. In addition to education, the Union Grove Baptist School appears eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage and social history, and under criterion C for architecture as the earliest extant school for African Americans in the county. Next is the Saul O'Brien School, also known as Cedar Grove School Number 2. This one-story L-shaped frame school is significant as the last known extant school building constructed using the Terrell School Fund. Dr. John Columbus Terrell, a native of Person County and a doctor in the northern part of the county, had amassed significant amounts of land and wealth by the time of his death in 1897. Out of concern for the limited educational opportunities available to children in the county, Dr. Terrell bequeathed $300 to each of the 26 school districts in the county to build schoolhouses for the white children thereof. He also left his farmland to the county. In total, the amount directed to the county's public schools totaled over $40,000. The Saul O'Brien School, while deteriorated, features a stone pier foundation, plain weatherboards, gables marked by gable returns and circular vents, and 6/6 wood windows topped by 3 light transoms. The interior, visible through the broken windows, retains beaded board ceilings and 4-panel doors with 3 light transoms. According to an exhibit on schools at the County Museum, the building was eventually given over for the education of Black students, and in 1941 was renamed Cedar Grove School Number 2. It appears to have remained in use until the 1950s, when many rural Black schools were consolidated into new buildings constructed by the Person County Board of Education. Another of the Terrell schools, a larger brick school in Cunningham Township, was documented in the 1970s but demolished by 1994. No other Terrell schools are known to be extant, though a newspaper article in the museum files notes that several other original school buildings have been converted to residences. So others may remain extant, but are unrecognizable as schools. In addition to education, the Saul O'Brien School appears eligible under criterion A for social history as the only known Terrell-funded school remaining in the county, and for African American ethnic heritage due to its association with the education of Black students in the county.
I will try this again. Located in the Bethel Hill community in the northeast part of the county, Bethel Hill School consists of a campus of classroom buildings, specialty buildings, and infrastructure largely dating from 1920 through 1970. Bethel Hill School, along with Helena High School in the Timberlake community south of Roxborough, which was placed on the study list in 2019, are the only extant early 20th century school complexes in the county. By 1970, rural schools at Hurdle Mills, Bushy Fork, Olive Hill, and Mount Terza were closed, and the main school buildings were demolished in the 1980s and 90s. The main building at Bethel Hill was completed in 1920, replacing earlier frame buildings nearby. It's an imposing two-story hip-roofed brick building with Spanish Revival style influences, including deep eaves marked with triangular braces, a round arch opening marking the inset entrance, and false parapet centered on the facade. Windows were replaced in the mid-20th century. The interior hallway, visible through the doors, retains original wood floors, beadboard wainscot, and an arch with paneled pilasters at the corners. Additional buildings were added to the campus from 1947 through 1970 and include a two-story hip-roofed high school classroom building that mimics the architecture of the 1920 building, a flat-roofed brick auditorium, initially also used as a gymnasium, was completed in 1947, and a one-story brick agriculture building was constructed about 1955. A water tower was erected about 1950. A flat-roofed brick cafeteria and concrete block community cannery were constructed in 1960, and a frame garage was built about the same time. The large flat-roof gymnasium was constructed in 1970. Playing fields to the south likely date to the 1930s. Bethel Hill School served grades K to 12 until 1970, when the junior high and high school grades were relocated to consolidated schools in Roxborough. The school remained open as an elementary school until 1998 and reopened as Bethel Hill Charter School in 1999, and it continues to serve as that charter school. 2 additional classroom buildings have been added to the campus since its establishment as a charter school. The playground and picnic shelter in front of the school also date from that period. But you can see from this map that the 2 new buildings are sort of behind the historic buildings. In addition to education, Bethel Hill School appears eligible under criterion C for architecture as an intact early 20th century school complex with buildings constructed throughout the mid-20th century, their styles ranging from Spanish colonial revival to modernist. Woodland Elementary School is the next property. Calls to integrate the public schools began in the 1950s, increasing after the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision. During that time, the County Board of Education began efforts to streamline the school system by consolidating smaller schools into larger ones and by constructing new modern schools for African American students in the county. In the 1950s, the county erected 3 elementary schools, Woodland, Oak Lane, and North End elementary schools in the rural parts of the county. These schools were all constructed for Black students. Located on the southwest side of Samora Road, the campus of Woodland Elementary was established in 1950. The earliest classroom wings were built using a Florida-style plan that featured classrooms that opened to covered walkways rather than enclosed hallways. Each of these wings has stacked steel sash windows, and clerestory windows on the south elevation have been painted. A combined cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium was constructed at the northwest corner of the complex about 1960. At the opposite end, an addition with library, teacher's lounge, and offices was built about 1964. At the southwest corner is a brick smokestack, metal water tower, and a pump house. The administration building dates to circa 2000. The 15-acre campus includes a playground, paved court and septic system with associated shed. In 1969, when the county schools were integrated and consolidated, elementary students from the White Olive Hill School were transferred to Woodland Elementary. The school remains in use as an elementary school today. This school was determined eligible for the National Register via the environmental review process in 2023. In addition to education, the site appears eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage and under criterion C for architecture as an intact mid-20th century school constructed for a segregated school population and displaying modernist style detailing, including large banks of original steel sash windows.
All right, next we have Oak Lane Elementary School. Located near the northwest corner of Jim Morton and Union Grove Church Roads, this school is typical of mid-20th century elementary school construction. It was built about 1955 to consolidate African American schools in the southwest part of the county. The one-story flat roof brick veneered building has an administration and cafeteria wing to the north, the common space also likely serving as a gymnasium and auditorium. The L-shaped classroom wing was constructed in two phases, 1955 and 1964. A large classroom building was added around 2000, linked via a walkway sheltered by a flat roof. All of the classrooms are lit by walls of aluminum framed fixed windows on a continuous brick knee wall, topped with a concrete windowsill. While the windows are replacements, the full width openings and sills remain. Matching windows, taller in height, are located on the facade of the cafeteria wing. Earlier site features still found on the campus include a water tower, smokestack, well house, reservoir, and playground. In addition to education, the school appears eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage and under criterion C for architecture as an intact mid-20th century school constructed for a segregated student population. And finally, the North End Elementary School. The property on which this school stands was acquired by the Board of Education in December 1954. And a May 1959 article in the Carolinian newspaper notes the school was hosting its first May Day celebration at its new location, indicating that the school was completed by 1959. The school complex includes a combined gymnasium, cafeteria, and auditorium at the south end, a classroom wing in the center, and a projecting classroom wings at the north end, resulting in an asymmetrical U-shaped campus. The flat-roofed classroom wings contain double-loaded corridors, and the wide grouped windows, likely originally steel windows, have been replaced with aluminum, but the original openings remain intact. The site slopes down to the north, resulting in stepped facades on the east and west elevations. A classroom wing at the north end of the complex was constructed about 2000. Playgrounds and fields extend north of the school. A smokestack is at the southeast corner of the school, and a water tower stands to the southeast within the tree line. The campus is surrounded by wooded areas to the north, east, and south. In addition to education, the school appears eligible under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage and under criterion C for architecture as an intact mid-20th century school. And that's it for schools, if there are questions or comments there. Okay. We'll move on. Do you
I'll
want
try
me
it
to?
again. I'll try
Okay,
it.
you let me know.
The ways in which a community cares for their aging population and deceased relatives can inform a discussion of the background of its residents and their cultural and religious beliefs. Additionally, the ways in which a community gathers for recreation and social interaction can inform our understanding of social priorities. Person County established the first county park system in the state when it introduced park programs as early as the 1940s. Recreation in the county expanded dramatically in the mid-20th century with the construction of the Hyco and Mayo Lakes. During the 1960s, swimming pools were constructed throughout the county, and fraternal organizations in the county constructed new buildings that are still in use today. In 1923, the Person County Commissioners erected a county home north of Roxborough to house elderly residents who could not stay in their homes or afford to take care of themselves. This building appears to be the second constructed on the property, as the 1923 plat shows a subdivision of the county homeland and an extant cemetery. The three-part building features elements of the colonial revival and craftsman styles popular in the 1920s, and includes a 1.5-story side-gabled center section with a rear L that houses the common spaces. Gabled hyphens connected to symmetrical 1-story hip-roofed side wings contain resident rooms with engaged porches on the far ends of the building. The interior of the building features a living room with fireplace, office, dining room, and support spaces on the lower level of the main building. The north and south wings have rooms arranged along a double-loaded corridor. They feature laminate flooring, hollow core wood doors, and dropped ceilings. The hyphens have beaded board below the windows. The property includes a stone wall along the south, bordering Stories Creek School Road. 2 cemeteries associated with the institution are located on separate parcels. Both are marked only with field stones and are largely overgrown, so the number of burials is not known. Find a Grave lists 6 burials, but I'm sure there are many, many more than that. Despite the installation of vinyl windows and material alterations to the interior, the Person County home appears eligible under criterion A for social history as a government-funded home for county residents. The cemeteries should be included with a discontiguous boundary. The Roxborough National Guard Armory is a representative example of mid-20th century armories in the state and retains high material integrity. It was constructed according to the standard B. Coffey and Olson plan and contains a high bay drill hall fronted by a smaller administrative section and flanked by wings that form a U shape around the drill hall. The concrete block building has a brick veneer and flat roofs with metal coping. The main entrance is centered on the administrative section along the front of the building, with flanking offices lit by 2 light metal ribbon windows and triple 4-light metal awning windows. The drill hall stands about twice as tall as the administrative section, with clerestory windows set high on the side walls. Classrooms have later dropped ceilings, but the hallways and bathrooms retain original materials. The National Guard Armory was determined eligible in 2010 through the ER process, citing significance under criterion A for military history and criterion C for architecture. We concur with this evaluation, which notes that armories as a whole represent an exceptionally important aspect of the Cold War reorganization and modernization of the military.
All right, Battle Axe Lodge number 120 was constructed in 1962 as a lodge for African American members of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina, free and accepted Masons. The building replaced an earlier lodge on a different site. The 2-story hip roof concrete block building has stacked aluminum awning windows on the first floor and small aluminum slider windows on the second floor that light the meeting hall. A steel door on the facade is sheltered by a front gabled porch supported by decorative metal posts. A separate entrance to the second floor is located on the west elevation above a small 1-story wing that contains restrooms. The interior features a meeting hall with raised ceiling, wood floors, and raised platforms at each end of the room. A 6-panel door leads to the exterior from this level. Wood stairs at the southwest corner lead to the lower level. This space was a meeting room for the Eastern Star, a women's fraternal organization. The Battle Axe Lodge appears eligible for the National Register under criterion A for African American ethnic heritage and social history as the only extant fraternal meeting house in the county constructed for African Americans. And the Person Lodge number 113 was chartered in 1847. The current building was completed in 1963 and dedicated in 1964. The two-story flat-roofed building is set well back from the street, the concrete block structure faced with a brick veneer. Paired doors are sheltered by a pedimented portico. Two light aluminum framed windows light the lower level, which is partially underground. A picnic shelter was constructed west of the building in the mid-1990s. The interior retains its original layout and finishes, with a lobby, offices, and meeting hall at the upper level, and a kitchen and dining room at the lower level. The Masonic Temple appears eligible for the National Register under Criterion A for Social History and Criterion C for Architecture as a highly intact fraternal meeting house.
This is the Whispering Pines swimming pool. The earliest semi-public swimming pool constructed in the county was Family Swimming Pool in Roxborough, constructed near the hospital in 1962. However, according to June Rogers, that was the only pool in the county and it was hard to get a membership. As a result, communities began to band together to raise money and identify land for additional pools. In many cases, land was donated by or leased from local families. As a result, at least 5 additional pools were constructed in the county in the mid to late 20th century, though Triple Springs Pool and Hilltop Pool are no longer extant. Neighbors in the Bushy Fork Hurdle Mills community sold stock to build the pool, which was constructed by Joe Parr on the land of Franklin Jackson Hester, under the condition that the land revert back to the Hester family if the pool closed. The site includes the swimming pool and related facilities, tennis courts, picnic shelter, and playground. The pool itself is unique in that it's configured as a rectangle with round projections on its north and south sides. A small kidney-shaped kiddie pool is located to the north. The pool originally had a sliding board, but it was removed in the 1980s. The pool appears eligible under Criterion A for recreation and social history as a recreational facility constructed by and for Person County residents. And there are 2 other pools extant in the county, but this is the one that we knew the most about, how it was formed and funded. So this is the one that we put up. Any questions about recreation and social history?
I don't have any questions. but
I'm sorry. I had a quick one. The sign, the lettering for the armory, I think is pretty significant feature of the building. But that's the other ones I've seen. That's pretty distinctive. The mid-20th century lettering. So I want to make sure that's.
Yeah, I think that lettering was probably part of the original plan. A lot of them have that
Yeah.
same font.
That spot, yeah.
Mhm.
That sort of really distinguishes it from other types of buildings. So I think that's pretty critical.
I just wanted to chime in. This whole presentation has been so impressive, but that category was even more capacious and wide-ranging, and the depth of your guys' work on all of these different properties is incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I did have a question, and I echo what Josie is saying, that yes, this is very impressive, and I know it's a lot of work. My question is, was Whispering Pines segregated, like at when it was first constructed? Because you said it was a neighborhood kind of community pool.
We don't know for sure. I assume that it was, having been built in the early 60s. The woman who told us about it, because it's sort of down a road in the trees, we wouldn't have known there were pools back in there. Was an older white woman in her 90s, and she was on the board when it was formed. I don't know for a fact, but I assume that it was, and I would speculate that perhaps some of these pools were formed in order to remain segregated, but I don't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. It's something though that I know as you go forward and get through that voluminous records that you have, something will probably pop up.
And we had a lot of questions at staff review as to why this county was, how it even came about that there were all these groups of citizens who were building their own pools. Because there didn't seem to be any county impetus behind that. So it's, I don't know if we're missing something there, but there's a story there. We just don't quite know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, here we go. Bridges, public utilities, municipal buildings, and even street patterns, when viewed collectively, can illustrate the growth and development of a community, providing information about transportation improvements, city services, and the priorities of local government. This is Truss Bridge number 35. Surrounded by dense tree cover, Truss Bridge 35 is located on a small curve of Barry Pierce Road, spanning the South Flat River in southwest Person County. This bridge was documented by the Historic American Engineering Record sometime after 1968. That documentation notes that the bridge was built in the early teens by the Champion Bridge Company of Wilmington, Ohio. A report on historic bridges in North Carolina that was completed in 2005 found that Truss Bridge 35 was a significant example of pin-connected half-hip Pratt pony truss, and it was determined eligible by that report. This piece of roadway is no longer the means of crossing the river. A new bridge crossing has been built about 200 feet to the southeast. However, Truss Bridge 35 appears eligible under criterion A for transportation and criterion C for engineering. And the Terza Fire Tower, located on the east side of Fire Tower Drive. The steel tower stands on a wooded 2-acre parcel and is accessed by a narrow dirt drive. The tower appears on the 1943 USGS topographic map of the area, but we don't have a more firm construction date than before 1943. According to the National Forest Foundation, fire towers gained popularity in the early 1900s as a primary way for spotting wildfires. Many were constructed by the U.S. Forest Service or by Depression-era work programs. A news report in 2023 notes that there were once as many as 200 lookout towers in North Carolina, and that while many remain standing, only about 24 are still manned. This is not one of them. The HPO files include information on 10 towers in 9 counties, including the National Register listed Warren County Fire Tower. The Terza Fire Tower is the only known fire tower to be extant in Person County, though it is also no longer in use. The tower appears eligible under criterion A for conservation and potentially criterion C for engineering, though more research needs to be done to determine the manufacturer.
If you guys like the last section, wait till we get through this one. We had some really great field trips. Roxborough Waterworks being one. Infrastructure related to power and water resources in the county was improved and expanded during the mid-20th century. In 1953, a new waterworks facility was constructed northwest of Roxborough to supply water to the burgeoning post-war population of the town. The facility replaced an earlier filter plant in the southwest quadrant of the city. Both facilities pulled water from Roxborough Lake, which was initially dammed in the early 20th century. On a new concrete dam and pumping station were constructed in 1955. The centerpiece of the water filtration plant is the 2-story Art Deco style concrete building with a smooth concrete finish and steel windows. Incised lettering at the parapet reads Roxborough Waterworks. The 3-story building to the north is connected by a series of 1-story concrete reservoirs. The interior of the main building retains concrete floors, smooth plaster walls, and original metal stairs and railings. A lab space is located at the upper floor of the north building. South and southwest of the buildings are two large, partially below grade covered holding tanks. Several in-ground filtration ponds are also located to the west. A residence accommodated an on-site technician, and a modern warehouse with reservoirs and testing facility is located to the northwest. The Roxborough Waterworks appears eligible under Criterion A for engineering and under Criterion C for architecture. And then the other side of the coin, the Roxborough Sewage Treatment Plant, located on the north side of Cavell Chubb Lake Road, just outside of the Roxborough city limits. This plant is the first municipal water treatment plant constructed in the county and is still in operation today. All of the key components necessary for sewage treatment were constructed in 1964, including a laboratory and office, aeration basins, pump house, clarifying ponds, digesters, and contact tanks. G.G. Strickland of Platt Davis and Associates in Durham served as the engineer for the project, and the contractor is listed as the Lee Construction Company out of Charlotte. The location was chosen for its location along Marlowe's Creek, into which the treated water flows. Additional resources constructed after 1980 include a new warehouse, administration building, and electrical building. The Roxborough Sewage Treatment Plant appears eligible under Criterion A for engineering and Criterion C for architecture.
This is the Person County Office Building, located at the southwest corner of South Morgan Road Street and Long Avenue. This two-story L-shaped office building is a highly intact example of a modernist style office building. The two-story building has a concrete foundation, brick veneer, flat roof, and paired aluminum frame windows separated by opaque spandrel panels between the floors. The main entrance is sheltered by a flat metal canopy and flanked by brick planters. A low brick wall extends along part of the sidewalk on South Morgan Street. The interior retains concrete block walls, original circulation with double loaded corridors, and original doors and bathroom finishes. The land was purchased by the county in 1958 for the purpose of erecting a county agricultural building. The building was designed by Durham architect George Watts Carr and built by a contractor George W. Kane. It currently houses offices for the North Carolina Agricultural Extension, the USDA Service Center, the North Carolina Forest Service, and Person County Soil and Water. The Person County Office Building appears eligible under Criterion A for government and Criterion C for architecture. The Roxborough Municipal Building was built the same year. The modernist style building is located just west of the Person County Courthouse. The building features a continuous foundation and steel structural system that is clad in a brick veneer, separated into vertical sections that match the width of the windows at the front right corner of the building. Deep overhangs of the roof and the first floor as it wraps around the right elevation emphasize the horizontality of the building. The interior is divided by use between the two floors, with city offices on the upper level and the fire station on the ground below. The interior was documented in 2020, at which time surveyors noted that much of the original materials remained, including terrazzo floors, wood wall paneling, metal windows, interior wood doors, and the council chamber with a curved desk and auditorium-style seating. The building was designed by architect M.A. Ham Associates and built by contractors E.M. Wilkerson and Son. It was determined eligible for the National Register in 2020, and we agree that it appears eligible under Criterion A for government and Criterion C for architecture.
So we'll do our series of public housing here. The Roxborough Housing Authority was established in 1969 and utilized a $2.25 million grant from the federal government to erect public housing on 3 separate sites: Green Gardens, Lee Gardens, and Harris Gardens. A 2024 Public Housing Architectural Context Survey documented complexes in Durham, Fayetteville, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem. The findings of that survey, which evaluated properties for National Register eligibility, can be applied to Roxborough as well. So we'll start with Harris Gardens, the largest of the 3 public housing complexes. This was constructed northeast of downtown in a predominantly African-American section of Roxborough, and even today stands at the city limits. It includes 74 units and 21 buildings arranged along Mount Bethel Church Road, Owens Street, and Monroe Street. Buildings are generally arranged parallel to the street and are largely 2-story buildings constructed in 3 different designs, though several 1-story units are also present. All have brick veneers and 1/1 windows. Some feature offset units resulting in stepped facades. A large grassy area is located west of Owens Street behind the buildings and was likely intended as a garden, though was never formally landscaped. Recreational fields are located on the south end of the complex, adjacent to the community building. This 1-story brick building includes offices, meeting spaces, and a gymnasium. While the building is constructed of the same brown brick as the residential buildings, it is more modernist in form, with the parapet walls forming strong angles on the facade. Next, we have Lee Gardens. This complex includes 62 units and 18 buildings and is the only one of the 3 complexes constructed largely with 1-story buildings and to be arranged with a curvilinear street pattern. The Public Housing Context Survey notes that several pieces of legislation in the 1960s, including the Senior Citizens Housing Act of 1962, led to the construction of more buildings focused on providing housing for low-income elderly residents. The construction of 1-story houses with ramps or at-grade entrances appears to have been Roxborough's response to this. The buildings are 1 and 2 stories, all with brick veneers and 1/1 windows. Some feature offset units resulting in a stepped facade. Again, a large grassy area is located in the center of the complex, and an office building stands at the intersection of Lyle and South Streets. The complex was constructed southwest of downtown, adjacent to a predominantly African-American section of Roxborough near Person. And the last of these is Green Gardens. Located in northwest Roxborough, this complex is the only one of the public housing complexes not constructed in a predominantly Black section of town. With 14 units and 4 buildings, it is also the smallest of the 4 complexes and the only complex of public housing constructed without an office building. The buildings, all 2 stories with brick veneers and 1/1 windows, stand parallel to Walker and Green Streets. A large grassy area is located at the northwest side of the complex, though was never formally landscaped. All 3 sites appear eligible under Criterion A for community planning and development and social history. The Public Housing Context Study lays out criteria for certain aspects of integrity that should be present for a public housing complex to be considered eligible. These include a substantially intact site plan, a high percentage of original buildings, original building design features, original facade materials except roofs and windows, original architectural ornamentation, and basic characteristics and dimensions of interior spaces. It further notes that because the buildings lack individual distinction, their significance is dependent in part on the relationship of buildings within the complex.
And this is the United States Post Office. This post office building was completed in 1970, functionally replacing the 1936 post office across the street. It's an example of a 1000 series post office being built with plans published in the USPS, the US Post Office Department's Building Designs Manual. The manuals were printed in 1959 and 1964 and provided plans for both modern and colonial revival style post offices, ranging from 1,000 to 12,000 square feet. This large flat roofed building has a blonde brick veneer, though the upper part of the walls is covered with flush panels that resemble concrete, and the parapet is topped with aluminum flashing. The left end of the facade features a continuous aluminum framed glass wall sheltered by a shallow flat roof on square columns. According to a 2012 USPS Nationwide Historic Context Study, quote, the 1,000 series post offices are significant in the area of community planning and development for their association with changing demographics and the rise of suburbia that had an important influence on the policies of operating the Postal Service, end quote. That report also indicates significance under criterion C for architecture. The style emphasizing efficiency and clean lines, and the suburban site plan reflecting a concern for convenience in an auto-oriented society. And that is all for infrastructure and community planning. Anyone?
Just appreciating this thoroughness and covering all these different categories. I'm just, woo.
We had so much fun. We went on a lot of field trips, and later I can tell you all about how sewage water is processed. So we learned
a
far
lot.
more than we needed to
Yeah.
on this project.
But again, people were so enthusiastic and friendly and willing to show us around the sewage treatment plant in the middle of the day when we show up unexpected and interrupt their work. So it's really a testament to the people of this county that we have this much information to share with you.
So we will start with some industrial properties, and these are all inside of Roxborough. While Roxborough was established as the county seat of Person County in 1793 and incorporated in 1855, the city did not experience significant growth until the arrival of the railroad in 1890. The railroad facilitated substantial growth in the town, which soon had a new brick courthouse, restaurants, pharmacies, offices, and banks. Perhaps most significantly, the railroad facilitated the establishment of the textile industry in Roxborough. With the construction of 4 mills between 1901 and 1926, textile production became Roxborough's primary industry and largest employer in the early and mid-20th century. All of the properties discussed here appear eligible under criterion A for industry, with additional criterion applicable as noted. So first we have the Roxborough Cotton Mill Village. J.A. Long erected the Roxborough Cotton Mill in 1901, and that was placed on the National Register already in 2009. And immediately he began constructing housing for his many workers. By 1925, 60 houses had been erected south and east of the mill, the area having been almost fully built out by that time. Narrow paved streets are arranged in a loose grid extending south from Church Street, with the only access via the intersection of Church Street and Lake Drive, which extends north-south between the mill and the village. So on this plat, the mill is to the northwest of that plat. Housing in the village includes a hip-roofed 3-bay house with inset front porch, a 3-bay single-pile house with a gabled rear L, a wide hip-roofed 5-bay house with shed roof porch, and a hip-roofed duplex. Wood weatherboards, 2/2 wood sash windows, 6 slight over 3 panel doors, turned porch posts, and interior corbelled brick chimneys are all typical. In 1961, the company platted the village in preparation for the sale of the housing into private ownership. At that time, this part of the village totaled 64 houses and also included a Methodist church and the East Roxborough School, which has since been converted to housing. While material replacement is common in the Mill Village, there's very little infill. The village retains its original street pattern, topography, landscape features, and repetitive building forms, making it easily recognizable as an early 20th century mill village. In addition to industry, Roxborough Cotton Mill Village appears eligible under criterion A for community planning and social history, and under criterion C for architecture. The Longhurst Mill is on the north end of town. This sprawling mill complex was the second cotton mill constructed in Roxborough, erected by J.A. Long as an associated plant to his 1901 Roxborough cotton mill. The main mill and associated structures were constructed beginning in 1904, and the mill opened in 1907. The mill was dedicated to spinning cotton, though initially did some dyeing of cotton as well. The earliest part of the mill was a wide rectangular building that extended east-west, with the main entrance located in a tower that faced the Longhurst Mill Village to the north, which we'll get to. A picker room was located to the northeast, connected by a hyphen. An opening room, boiler room, and switchboard room were constructed at the southeast corner of the main mill. A railroad spur extended from the main north-south rail line and ran across the south side of the mill. Raw cotton storage warehouses were located adjacent the railroad spur opposite the mill. The mill was enlarged about 1935 with a large addition to the south, its architecture echoing that of the original mill. The majority of the interior retains wood floors, wood and metal posts, beams and trusses, as well as original stairs. While windows have largely been bricked in, steel sash windows remain on the monitor, and most first floor windows actually remain behind the brick infill. The National Register nomination for the Roxborough Cotton Mill noted that in 1912, Longhurst Mill increased its spindle count by 5,000 spindles. After World War I, another 10,000 spindles were added to Longhurst Mill, bringing its total to over 25,000 spindles by 1919. About 1973, the company was sold to Toltex, a Martinsville, Virginia company, and the mill closed in 2001 and went into bankruptcy. While windows have been infilled, the mill complex retains a high degree of material integrity, both on the interior and exterior. In addition to industry, Longhurst Mill appears eligible under criterion C for architecture.
An extra fun fact about this mill is we found a kitten and I adopted it. Never know what's going to happen in the field. So the Longhurst Mill Village Historic District. Worker housing for the Longhurst Mill was constructed north and west of the mill, with 104 houses constructed in total by 1961, when the housing was sold into private ownership. Narrow streets are arranged in a loose grid, roughly aligning with North Main Street and Providence Road. Houses on the west side of North Main Street were constructed first, generally utilizing traditional side-gabled or gable and wing forms. Sanborn maps show roughly 45 houses in this part of the village by 1925, though teardowns and some infill in this area are more common, resulting in a lower density of historic structures. Housing north of the mill was constructed after 1914, the forms consistent with those built for the Roxborough Cotton Mill and Cavell Mill in the 1920s. The 1925 Sanborn map shows approximately 45 houses arranged along the 5 streets in this part of the village, the area having been almost fully built out by that time. Housing in the village follows the same forms found in the Roxborough Cotton Mill Village. Among these are hip roof 3-bay house with inset front porch and a 3-bay hip roof house. Several larger houses may have been constructed for mill managers. Wood weatherboards, 6/6 wood sash windows, exposed rafter tails, turned porch posts, and interior corbelled brick chimneys are all typical. Non-residential resources include 2 churches, Longhurst Park, and a small building that appears to have been constructed as a school, though more research needs to be done on that building. The Longhurst School, constructed in the 1920s, has been demolished. While material replacement is common in the Mill Village, it retains original street patterns, topography, landscape features, and repetitive building forms, making it easily recognizable as an early 20th century mill village. In addition to industry, Longhurst Mill Village appears eligible under criterion A for community planning and social history. And then we have the Cavell Mill Village. In 1923, A.T. Baker and Company opened a plant in Roxborough, just north of Longhurst Mill, for the manufacture of automobile upholstery. In 1927, the plant was acquired by the Collins and Aikman Company of Philadelphia. The name Cavell is an abbreviation of the name Collins and Aikman Velvets. As part of the initial construction of the mill, the company laid out a village of worker housing that extended west and south of the mill and featuring narrow streets and a series of stone walls that help level the uneven terrain of the village as it slopes toward a creek at the west end. The 1925 Sanborn map shows 17 houses arranged along 3 streets. Cavell more than doubled the number of houses by 1943. And by 1951, when the company platted the village for sale, the village totaled 111 houses. Housing in the village follows the same forms found in the Roxborough Cotton Mill Village and the Longhurst Mill Village. In the northeast corner of the district is a 1-story commercial building that still bears a sign reading Collins and Aikman. Wood weatherboards, 2/2 wood windows, 1 light over 3 panel doors, turned porch posts, and interior corbelled brick chimneys are all typical. The Cavell Mill Village was determined not eligible for the National Register in 1995 as part of the Environmental Review Program. However, the current survey found that while material replacement is common in the Mill Village, there is very little infill. Additionally, the village retains its original street pattern, topography, landscape features, and repetitive building forms, making it easily recognizable as an early 20th century mill village. In addition to industry, the Mill Village appears eligible for the National Register under Criterion A for community planning and social history. And just a note, the 1995 Environmental Review noted that the mill was enlarged significantly through the 20th century, measuring roughly 12 times the size of the original mill by 1969. So the appearance of the Baker Cavell Mill is difficult to figure out, and many of the additions and modernizations to the still functioning factory complex obscure those historic parts of the mill. While it appears the majority of the complex was constructed before 1969, that report found, and we agree, that without more information, the mill does not appear eligible for the National Register.
And we don't normally present things that are not eligible, but I knew y'all were going to ask about the mill. So, this is the Cavell Executive Village Historic District. This village was erected about 1934 by Collins and Aikman, just north of its Velvet plant on US 501. So the worker housing is south of the plant, and this is north. Unlike the traditional villages constructed throughout the North Carolina Piedmont, this village housed executives of the mill rather than laborers. It utilized 2 basic colonial revival style house plans for the 10 houses that were constructed. Houses were rotated or flipped for variety and are additionally differentiated through varied classical treatments at their entries, wings, and gable vents, and the presence or absence of second-story overhangs. The development also utilized 1 plan for its 6 shared garages and 1 designed for its 4 classical streetlights. Houses are arranged along the west side of the street, and an undeveloped crescent of land on the east side between Executive Lane and US 501 is now designated a park. The houses were built by the company in a single building campaign and remained under company ownership until about 1951, when both these houses and the main mill village south of the mill were sold. The Cavell Executive Village was determined eligible in 1995 as part of the environmental review process. The current survey found that despite material alterations to most of the buildings, the village remains a unique example of mill-owned housing for company executives rather than laborers, and is thus eligible for the National Register under Criterion A for industry and social history, though is not likely eligible under Criterion C for architecture. And this is, if you were counting, the 4th mill. This is Somerset Mill. It is the smallest of Roxborough's 4 textile mills. Somerset Mill was also the last to be constructed. It was incorporated in 1925 and the building completed by 1926. By 1931, the mill had already completed an addition that doubled its manufacturing capacity. By the late 30s, the company was producing cotton towels. The core of the mill building is one story with a very low sloped front gabled roof with monitor and roof brackets, and it's partially obscured by these later additions, but you can see it on the top right. The building has a concrete foundation, brick exterior, and original grouped steel sash windows that cover the upper 3/4 of the wall surface, extending nearly to the roof line. Original metal windows also remain on the monitor, and many of the windows on the side elevations remain in place, although obscured by vertical metal sheathing on the exterior. So on this bottom right, you see this vertical sheathing. The windows are all just underneath that. One-story flat-roofed wings on the north and east elevations obscure part of the original mill building and were likely constructed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as the mill changed ownership. The site also includes a fiber room, boiler room, water tower, and a small collection of mill housing across Old Durham Road to the east. The interior of the mill retains wood floors, exposed steel post and beams, and wood sheathing on the underside of the roof. Wood trusses are exposed at the monitor roof. While some partition walls were constructed in the space, few extend all the way to the ceiling, and the majority of the building retains its open floor plan. At least 8 mill houses remain extant east of the mill on the east side of Old Durham Road. The one-story hip-roofed frame houses were constructed using the same plans used for mill housing in the other 3 villages. Given the small number of houses and their inability to stand alone as a Mill Village historic district, any designation of the Somerset Mill should include these houses. Despite late 20th century alterations, the mill retains a high degree of material integrity, including its original windows. The Somerset Mill and Mill Village appear eligible under criterion A for industry and C for architecture.
And last in this group, we have the Coca-Cola Bottling Company. This building, constructed by local contractor George W. Kane, is immediately recognizable as a Coca-Cola plant, with the cast stone sign panel still in place on the facade and the cast stone door surround, hipped red tile roof with exposed purlins found on other bottling plants in the state. The 2-story red brick building retains steel sash windows at the 2nd story and an original 1-story flat-roofed wing at the southwest corner facing Long Avenue. A large 2-part flat roof wing to the south is of later concrete block construction. The company was established about 1913 as the Roxborough Bottling Works, occupying an earlier building. In May 1935, owner O.B. McBroom broke ground for a new modern facility in West Roxborough. The building was completed by October of that year, and with the new facility, the company was able to increase capacity to 60 cases of Coke per hour. While the first floor of the 1935 building has been updated over time, it retains original tile floors. The 2nd floor space was rehabilitated as a small apartment. Industrial space to the rear remains largely intact and include loading ramps and a small office for a watchman. In addition to industry, the Coca-Cola bottling plant appears eligible under criterion C for architecture. And that's it for urban industry. If there are any questions or comments? We're almost there. So we'll move on to urban historic districts. The earliest residential areas to develop outside of the mill villages extended north and south from downtown along Main Street. By the 1920s, the town had also expanded to the west on the west side of present-day US 501. Southwest of town, initially outside the town limits, African Americans settled in a residential area surrounding the Person County High School. The 4 districts presented here illustrate the largest collections of intact early to mid-20th century residential development in Roxborough. All appear eligible under criterion A for community planning and development and criterion C for architecture. The first is the North Roxborough Residential Historic District. This includes the area north of the city's commercial core and is generally bounded by North Lamar Street on the west, Walker Street on the north, the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and North Fouché Street on the east, and by the Roxborough Commercial Historic District to the south. This district contains roughly 100 one- and two-story dwellings constructed between 1842 and 1960. Nearly 1/3 of houses in the district were built prior to 1910. The oldest house constructed in the district is the Roxborough Male Academy, a Greek Revival style building built about 1842. Other houses from this period were constructed in the Queen Anne and Free Classic styles. Roughly half of the dwellings in the district were built between 1910 and 1939 during a noteworthy period of growth in Roxborough's history. They generally include examples of the Classical Revival, Colonial Revival, Tudor Revival, Craftsman after 1940, largely minimal traditional, transitional ranch, and ranch styles. A number of early and mid-20th century duplexes are located in the district, mimicking the styles of the single-family houses. Outbuildings associated with some of the district's dwellings include detached single-car garages or small storage sheds. Non-residential buildings include these three churches. A 2020 report prepared for the environmental review process found, and we agree, that the North Roxborough Residential Historic District appears eligible as it reflects significant trends that shaped the expansion of Roxborough in the early 20th century and includes a variety of distinctive architectural forms and styles. While material alterations are common, on the whole, they do not diminish the historic character of this architecturally diverse residential area within the city of Roxborough.
Extending south from downtown is the South Roxborough Residential Historic District. It includes just south of the commercial core. It generally includes dwellings on both sides of South Lamar, South Main, and Academy Streets. This district contains roughly 90 one- and two-story dwellings constructed between 1875 and 1955. The majority of buildings within the proposed district were constructed before 1910 and include examples of the Greek Revival, Italianate, and Queen Anne styles. Approximately 1/3 of the dwellings in the district were constructed between 1910 and 1939 and include examples of the Classical Revival, Foursquare, Colonial Revival, Tudor Revival, Neoclassical, Prairie, and Craftsman styles. About 20 houses in the district were built between 1940 and 1955, most on side streets or on infill lots between older buildings. These were generally built in the Colonial Revival, minimal, traditional, and transitional ranch styles. Non-residential resources include churches, a post office, library, and commercial buildings, most at the north end of the district, adjacent to the commercial core. The South Roxborough Residential Historic District reflects significant trends in residential design, similar to those found north of the commercial core, but with a greater degree of difference between high-style dwellings and the vernacular resources. A 2020 report prepared for the ER process found, and we agree, the eligibility of the district. This is Reamstown. Reamstown is a suburban residential neighborhood west of Roxborough's commercial core on the west side of US 501. Platted in 1890, the subdivision was laid out in a standard grid pattern that is bisected by Reams Avenue. Nearly 1/3 of the houses were constructed prior to 1910 and include elements of the Queen Anne, Italianate, and Free Classic styles. Another third were built between 1910 and 1944 and include Craftsman, Tudor Revival, Colonial Revival, and minimal traditional stylistic elements. Additional houses built between 1945 and 65, largely at the northwest part of the neighborhood, exhibit elements of the Colonial Revival, minimal traditional, and ranch styles. The same 2020 environmental review report found eligibility of this district, and we agree. that it's eligible as the first, oldest, and largest planned suburban neighborhood in the city of Roxborough. While that report noted that the area was occupied by African Americans in the mid-20th century, our research did not confirm this. The predominant African American neighborhood was south and west of this area. And I'll just finish this section. This is Sunset Hills, located northwest of downtown Roxborough and immediately west of Reamstown. The Sunset Hills development is one of the largest and most intact mid-20th century residential developments in Roxborough. Initially platted in 1937, the earliest portions of the neighborhood were built in the 1940s, with craftsman and colonial revival style houses, as well as period revival cottages. Those constructed along West Gordon Street were generally modest in size, while houses on Crestwood Drive were large in scale. Most featured brick veneers and traditional detailing, mostly categorized as colonial revival styles. Later houses on Seavers Circle, Charles Circle, and the west end of Crestwood Drive include minimal traditional and ranch-style housing, most with brick veneers. While West Gordon Street and Crestwood Drive continue the street grid established by Reamstown, Seavers Circle and Charles Circle utilized U-shaped roads, allowing for interesting views and vistas as one moves through the neighborhood. Mature trees throughout the development, as well as the planned green space in the center of Seavers Circle, contribute to the park-like atmosphere. The neighborhood's an excellent example of early to mid-20th century residential development and traditional architectural styles of the era. And it appears eligible under criterion C for architecture. And one thing of note is while the houses on the east side of Chubb Lake Road, which is this little section here, were originally platted with the Reamstown development, the ranch forms are more consistent with the housing in the Sunset Hills development. So we included them with this district instead of Reamstown. Any questions about urban historic districts? 3 of those were already determined eligible, and we just confirmed and adjusted the boundaries.
I have a question about, you mentioned a little bit that Reamstown was thought to have an African-American component, and you said it's to the south, the African-American community is to the southwest. Is there any possibility that there is some historic district that should come out of that African-American context? And I ask this because we've got 2 communities, one in Fayetteville and one in Greensboro, that are African-American historic neighborhoods that are coming up. And so if there's a way to kind of flag that earlier, I mean, I know you're doing quite a bit, but it would be helpful to have maybe that identified
we definitely looked at it. So what we did, there's an area sort of south and west of that was historically African-American. And it was one of the city of Roxborough requested that we look at the mill villages and at the African-American part of town. It's really tricky because some of it, like in Greensboro, the oldest parts started out as white housing, and then there is a section, but it architecturally is really kind of a mess, and there's a lot of infill. So there's little pockets of 5 or 6 houses here and a couple of houses here, but it doesn't really read as a district. So what we did do in terms of survey was that we focused a lot of survey effort in that area. We did not individually survey any single buildings in these historic districts because we thought these are districts that will be easy for someone to go back and look at later. We were not sure that someone would go back and look at the African-American neighborhoods later. So we spent a lot of time documenting individual buildings in those areas. But it was really hard to see a historic district emerge from that area. Anything else? We're almost done. You guys are going to get out before noon. We only have 4 more. and they're good ones.
This is the last category. We may use every minute of our 3 hours, but we're in the home stretch. Okay, 20th century residential properties. Most of the early to mid 20th century residential resources in the rural portions of the county were documented as part of multi-generational farms and were not evaluated as individual resources. Likewise, within Roxborough, most early to mid 20th century resources fall within the proposed historic districts. However, a number of buildings displayed distinctive architecture and were thus evaluated individually. Additionally, Roxborough, like cities throughout the country, experienced significant population growth in the post-World War II era. While none of the post-war neighborhoods rose to the level of National Register significance, several modernist-style buildings do stand out. The 4 houses presented here appear eligible under criterion C for architecture. So the Walter and Annie Laurie Woody house. This house is among the most exuberant examples of the craftsman style in Roxborough and retains high material integrity to convey the style. Located at the southwest corner of North Main and West Moorhead Streets, the house was built by contractor George W. Kane in 1922. It was constructed for W.R. Woody, a prominent Roxborough merchant and businessman with the firm Woody, Long and Morton. The hip roof house is distinctive for its blonde brick veneer, terracotta tile roof, and large paired brackets along the roof line. It has a combination of 9/1 and 12/1 wood windows, all with granite sills. A 20-light French door is sheltered by a hip roof porch supported by tapered wood posts on brick piers. A gabled porch on the right elevation has matching supports. The interior is highly intact with original floor plan, wood floors, moldings and trim, mantels, and French doors. The second floor is equally intact, and the house even retains 3 bathrooms with original fixtures and tile. The property was conveyed by W. Ruffin Woody Jr. and his wife Elizabeth to the Person County Museum of History in 2012. The site includes a brick and concrete garage northwest of the house. This was maybe one of our favorite field trips, the Henry and Jean Newell house. Perhaps the most remarkable modernist style residence in the county, this unique house was patterned after House Beautiful magazine's 1958 Pace Setter house. That house, pictured in the top left, was designed by Vladimir Osipov, constructed in Honolulu, Hawaii, by Dr. and Mrs. Howard Lillistrand, and was listed to the National Register in 2008. Upon seeing the magazine, which dedicated an entire issue to drawings, photos, and descriptions of the house, the Newells contracted Osipov to request purchase of the plans, but were told the plans belonged to the homeowner and were not available for sale. Not to be deterred, Henry Newell, a draftsman for Bell Aircraft, utilized the plans published in the magazine, scaled them up, and drafted the plans himself. The house features intersecting, low-sloped, gabled, and hipped roofs intended to make it blend with the surrounding landscape. It is set into a low hillside with the main level approached from the north and a basement level visible on the south. The gabled porte cochere is supported by cedar timbers with cedar cross braces, varied from the wood used on the Lillistrand house and chosen because it was native to North Carolina. The plans copied the Lillistrand house exactly, including the placement of furniture within the main rooms, making the building a near carbon copy of the original plan. The interior features vertical wood paneling, exposed ceiling beams from Oregon in the main living spaces, and exposed brick at the fireplace, a variation from the stone that was used at the Lillistrand house. A dining room and kitchen are northeast of the main living space. A hallway extends west from the entrance with a guest bathroom, guest bedroom, and 2 children's bedrooms located south of the hallway. All of these spaces feature traditional flat ceilings, the contrast making the vaulted ceilings of the living room all the more impressive. Windows in the main living spaces are large wood-framed picture windows that extend the full height of the walls, including a continuous window wall that lights the main hallway. The primary suite is located on the west end of the bedroom wing and includes a separate sitting room. A basement level pavilion playroom, constructed as an open air space, was enclosed with full height glass in 1991, the only change to the original plans.
This is the Donovan O.M. and Mary J. Harper House. This is perhaps the most overtly modernist style house within the Roxborough city limits. The Newell House is just outside the city limits. This house was constructed in 1971 in a historically African-American part of Southwest Roxborough. Donovan and Mary J. Harper purchased the property in 1970, and Donovan, an educator by trade, designed and constructed the house himself. The house features a one-story flat-roofed section on the left that contains the public spaces and a shed-roofed wing on the right that houses the bedrooms. Both sections are covered with white Roman brick veneer and feature deep overhangs at the roof lines. The entrance features paired 8-panel doors, full-height side lights, and a 3-part transom lit by pendant lights. The interior retains not only its original split foyer plan, but nearly all of the original features, including carpet, wallpaper, and colored trim, bathroom fixtures, and switch plates. A planter in the entrance took advantage of the light provided by the side lights. White brick fireplaces are located in the main living room as well as in a basement level family room. A carport is located at the north end of the basement level. The Harper House is significant as a vernacular interpretation of modernist architecture. And our very last one, the Home Savings and Loan Association. Built in 1964, the building is one of a number of mid-20th century modernist buildings constructed in Roxborough, though one of only a handful to have been constructed by the private sector. The building has a steel structure with brick and glass curtain walls and a flat roof that projects significantly from each elevation, supported by metal posts on the facade, where an entrance bay projects from the otherwise rectangular building. The side elevations feature 3 light awning windows with aluminum sashes. The interior was documented in 2020, and that survey found high material integrity with original materials, including terrazzo floors, bathroom fixtures, kitchen cabinets, stove and sink. This seems like the wrong thing. I don't know why they'd have kitchen cabinets, but it has a lot of original interior features, including a service counter, teller's window, and glass and wood floating panels behind the teller's window. That 2020 ER report found, and we agree, that the Home Savings and Loan appears eligible for its mid-century modern design. And I promise we'll stop talking now. Do y'all have any questions, or did you fall asleep?
I just want
honest-
to echo that, as others have said, it was fascinating to get to see an entire county's life over a 100 or 200 year period of time, from all the different aspects, from education to swimming pools to gas stations to farming to the armory. So what a wonderful experience. And I wanted to applaud you again for all the detail work here. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you. You should visit Person County if you have not. It's pretty amazing.
One question I had, given that it's a border county, especially with the tobacco and other industries there, to what degree did they face Virginia in terms of transportation and commerce versus Raleigh? Did you look into that at all, or was that an element of that particular county? I was trying to think about, the preservation of the tobacco barns in particular. I think the Norfolk Bristol Highway ran right across the border there, and there's a lot of commerce on the Virginia side. So I didn't know if that was played into that particular county in their agriculture or not.
They were definitely connected, and I think more of it will come out in the report. I mean, at every farm, we asked them where they took their tobacco to market. And a lot of it was Roxborough or Durham, but sometimes it was Danville or somewhere in the north.
Okay.
And we had the one woman who said she packaged up the eggs and took them to Danville to sell. So we always asked people where they were selling, where the markets were. So there was definitely some overlap, and especially in the northern part of the county, there was, there's some of those roads that you can only get to by going through Virginia. So there's definitely some overlap, and there certainly seems to be overlap in the architecture too, where some of the architecture from Halifax County, Virginia is coming down into Person County.
I just noticed I'm involved with the Reynolds Homestead. It's in Virginia in Patrick County, and Virginia Tech's got that as a historic site. And that 1850 house looked just like that house, and the construction and all of that. And it's a border county as well. It's on the other side of the Virginia-North Carolina border, but there's a particular culture around sort of the border counties, especially as you get closer and closer to the mountains, that's similar for those few counties that are in that area of the state.
Yeah, and we definitely saw some houses that felt like they belonged in Caswell County because they just look like the stuff that we see in Caswell County and Yanceyville. So there's definitely the county border lines don't mean anything in terms of how people are living.
I have a comment that will lead to a question, and I know other folks in the committee have heard me say this before, so I probably sound like a broken record, but if Dr. Johnson made an important point a few moments ago in her question about African-American resources. And as I was making notes to myself as we were going through the presentation, I count maybe 8 of the 64 properties deal exclusively or primarily with African-American resources. But we're talking about a county that, at least in 1860, had 40% African-American population, and even today has a relatively high percentage. So my comment is, or my question is, why are there not more African-American resources, whether they're individual, those that you have pointed out, and I agree with the recommendations, there are churches or schools or recreation or public housing. Where are the individual houses that represent the African-American experience in Person County?
Mm-hmm. So the Donovan Harper House at the second to last one, he was an educator at the Person County High School. So that was the Black high school. We had a lovely chat with him. I think part of it is that a lot of the houses, especially in the rural farmsteads, the African-Americans were often there. They were tenants, they were working, they were living there. Some of even the primary houses were occupied by African-Americans in the later years. So any of that would be part of that story. We didn't come across a lot. There were little pockets where there were early 20th century African-American landowners. But some of it is just that, and we had in our initial list, more African-American schools and funeral homes. We found one Rosenwald school, but these buildings are more than partially collapsed. They were sort of hanging on by a thread. So staff didn't feel like they were worth moving forward since they will probably not be here in a few years. So, I mean, we definitely struggled to find those. We, as we're surveying in general, we're working in Vance County now, try to lean into that. So all things equal, we're more likely to survey a Black church than a white church, just because we already know the history of the white churches. It's not that it's not important, but and we did survey more African-American single family homes in Roxborough than we did white houses. They just architecturally were not particularly significant and didn't hold together as a neighborhood. So we tried to focus more energy there, but we didn't have enough of them that rose up to the National Register. Sherry, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, especially in town, it was a lot of ranch houses, ranch neighborhoods, post-war, veterans programs, helping them build and things like that. And there are so many ranch houses that it's basically impossible to evaluate them in context of each other because they're all the same. So there were a lot of places that we wanted to, but just didn't feel like they were quite there. And that's not to say we didn't miss something, and it may come up as we are writing the report. There may be other histories, but I think Heather makes a good point too. A lot of that's covered in the agricultural history with all of those tenant houses that are remaining extant. And maybe we just need to highlight that more in the way that we write it.
Well, this is David Ruffin. Excuse me. I'd like to just concur with Sean's comment. Having grown up in also a border county to Virginia in Hertford County, which is east, obviously Vance is east of Person, and therefore you are going to be looking at anything east of Person is even more predominant historically African American. Even in my youth, many years ago, we were 60% African American in Hertford County. So my point there is, what I'm sure you're doing an earnest effort, but I think certainly in that region, particularly the further you go east, you're going to really have tremendous amount of historic population of African American, and we'd hope certainly that there would be even more and more opportunities to highlight that. And before I just also would like to say, seconding Noah's comment, we do this at the Historical Commission quite frequently and commend staff for their tremendous work. But I mean, this was yet another example of fantastic energy resource development. And from just the Historical Commission's perspective, thank you so much for excellent work.
And I was gonna add back to Sean's point. One of the ways in which the story, the narrative about the African American presence may not be in these architecturally interesting homes because of economic disadvantage and disenfranchisement that occurred. And you know, that history is what comes through. And so when you say tenant houses, I see sharecropper.
Yeah.
I see a different kind of history and relationship there, which I think it's too neutral in that sense, because there was something about, I mean, up until 1974, that museum house didn't have indoor plumbing. Now that is,
Oh, it still doesn't have indoor plumbing.
you know, that is astonishing. But it points to something else that's happening within the county, because I'm in Granville County, and so we're adjacent, and there is this tension around racial relations. Folk will say, well, be careful if you're driving through Person because you're not known there. No, for real. No, this is what I've gotten. So I'm just saying that there's so much richness and a layering that I hope comes through. And those cemeteries, Sean, you didn't mention the cemeteries that are probably one of the only ways in which you can get a narrative about Black community life. And so that's kind of my reflection on this whole thing. And it is comprehensive. I agree. So now we can get into the nuance of what does some of this mean?
Yeah, and we have lots of sources talking about sharecropping and tenant farming. It's all sort of fluid based on what the individual contract was with different people, but we have the social scientist stuff from UNC from the 1930s, which is amazing, but was mostly focused on white farmers. We have a memoir that's largely focused on white farmers, but we have all of that stuff that Randy Hester has collected on the Lawson family, and he has just reams of information and oral histories and things. So I think we'll rely a lot on that as well.
I just want to make one quick comment too about, and this is a little out of the box, but for the future, like one of the comments you made on the same topic was that some of the resources, especially schools and other community buildings, you see like partially, you know, there's not much building left perhaps, but from an archaeological perspective that it's becoming or is an archaeological site. Not that all these places aren't or might have associated archaeological elements as well. And that's another way to help tell the story. Cemeteries also, obviously important, but even civic buildings and schools, like there's been a recent a dissertation out of Chapel Hill on like the archaeology of Rosenwald schools. And so that's really a growing area of research, and that can also help tell that story. So I know that's not your all's areas, and you've done an amazing amount of work, but if there is a resource like that where you think, gee, this would, if it was intact, would have been, a really good candidate, maybe there's a way to be out of the box and bring in a colleague or someone who can look at the D potential for D.
Yeah, and we did, we still surveyed all of those properties, so they still all have files and records and dots. So it may be, and Beth and Sarah, I'm thinking especially about that Woodsdale area that had both a historically Black school and a funeral home on an adjacent property, and they're both pretty deteriorated, but that general area is probably rich with archaeological information, so we can maybe send that one over to OSA.
I also just want to say, I didn't want Heather, Sherry, you to think I was being critical of the work. You guys did a fantastic job. Everyone else has said that. And so I just try to refocus the discussion as a reminder that we're at the study list stage. What you presented is obviously comprehensive, and hopefully at the National Register stage, there's an opportunity to bring in some more of these perspectives. So I just wanted to clarify that. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Same.
Sir. Any further discussion? Beth, Sarah, are we at the point where we can entertain a motion? Is that the next step? Is there a staff recommendation first that we need to hear?
Staff does recommend approval of all the proposed study list candidates. And I will just while everybody's thanking everybody, I will throw in a quick thank you to Beth King. This is one of 7 countywide surveys, is that correct? That came out of the hurricane funding.
1 of 7 being funded through this
particular pot of money, exactly. And so we normally have 1 to 2 countywide surveys going on at any given time, and she's been managing 7 plus some other surveys that were coming along through other channels. So I really want to commend Beth for riding herd over all of this and keeping it on track and supporting Heather and Sherry. And of course, Heather and Sherry's work has been amazing in Person County. So carry on.
In that case, is someone willing to make a motion or ready to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Joe, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second. Oh, I'll let Jim. Dr. Harper, you can. Yeah.
Dr. Harper, thank you. Then all those in favor of accepting the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say no. Are there any abstentions? Looks like the motion passes and that motion is successful. Is there, Sarah, anything else we need to do? That's the only agenda item for today, is that correct?
That's the only agenda item. We were hoping to do Clay County as part of this meeting. We've had a small internal survey in Clay County, but with our Western Office folks and the consultant out there who was working on that, all being affected by Hurricane Helene, we're going to kick that out till February. But that one will not be a 3-hour travel, the 3-hour tour. It'll be a bit shorter, but equally entertaining and enriching. I think we've already seen it in staff review. So, yeah.
In that case, before we adjourn, I just want to say thanks to everyone, all the committee members, Heather, Sherry, Dr. Waters, Ramona, Sarah, Beth, all of you for being here today, Jeff too. And if there's no other comment or questions, can I hear a motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn.
I believe I got David Birdstone with a second by Joe Opperman. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No, any abstentions? Then I believe we are officially adjourned, and thank everyone again. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for
Thank
hanging
you.
in there with
Thank
us.
you. Thanks.
Excellent.